Hey everybody, welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, Assistant Professor of Communication and Media at Lund University. Remember, you can follow the show on Twitter at SMNP Podcast or visit us on the web at socialmediaandpolitics.org. All right, y'all, here we are for the 6th annual Social Media and Politics Year in Review with Dr. Anamaria Dutceac-Segesten. She is a docent in strategic communication at Lund University, and 6th time around. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to join you for this year in review. Every year, there's something happening that is unique and exciting. And this year is not going to be an exception, I think. Sometimes it's funny looking back at whatever we've been talking in the past and see how our predictions holding on. And I think in many cases, they actually do hold. So I'm very excited in this role, like part looking back and part looking forward.
Absolutely. And I think, I think I speak for both you and me when I say that this has been quite a hectic end of the year, especially with the academic timetable, with the end of the semester approaching. And so, I've only done maybe a day or two of scouting out material. And every time I do that, you go down the rabbit hole and you just find that there's so many interesting things to talk about. So for new listeners who may have joined us just this year, the idea is that both Anamaria and I present 3 gifts, which are basically things that we decide to talk about, both in terms of maybe what happened in the past year, but also what is heading forward.
Exactly. And that's the funny part, to identify that which may have a lasting value. And I'm almost tempted, but I save that maybe for last, but I give you a preview, to ask you that, is there any prediction that you've made or any comment that you engaged with in the past 6 years of reviewing the social media and politics world that you were particularly proud of having predicted?
I think for me, it's more about some of the individual episodes being maybe a little bit ahead of their time.
Which one? You have one in mind?
I can't think of one exactly.
This is like asking a parent to choose one of their children.
No, I know, but I was just looking at in Google Docs my notes from last year, and just in this year in review series, it's really everything. We talked about political ads, but also talked about the death policies of certain platforms, and so maybe the prediction that some of the old leaders in the U.S. would have to deal with this did not occur, thankfully, this year. But why? Do you have one in mind?
I'm thinking a lot about this regulation red line. I've had it, I think, from the very beginning. One of my constant concerns has been about regulating social media platforms. And I think I was an early voice in this. Now everybody talks about this. Everybody from national governments, obviously the United States, but also France and China and so on and so forth, and the European Parliament nonetheless. So that's one thing. So I think that was a good one. And another one that I thought was kind of not necessarily confirmatory, but definitely not wrong, is the politician as the influencer. Mm-hmm. I think, I don't even remember when, my time perception is totally warped of 2020. Like everything is one massive blob of Corona period. But at some point, either 18 or 19, I think I was bringing up this idea of politicians borrowing from the world of social media influencers certain strategies and tactics. And I think this is something that we have seen increasingly going on.
Yeah, in terms of what you were saying about you were just asking like what particular episodes, right, would be interesting. I mean, just looking back on this year, this will lead nicely into my first gift, which is about a year in review from all the different platforms in terms of politics. But thinking about the podcast this year, both with Dr. Michael Cohen in his book, Modern American Campaigns, gets into the idea that individual candidates are talent. So parties are more of talent spotters than they do playing their traditional role. But also we had an episode with Madeline Toomey, who worked on digital partnerships basically influencer partnerships with the Joe Biden campaign. So all in all, this year, there were 18, this will be the 18th episode of the podcast this year. I aim for 2 a month, so that's a little bit coming short of 24, but I'm very happy with the content.
The quality is always what matters.
And I acknowledge that the sound quality is not always the greatest, but it's very hard to control the guest side of the audio, right? So I know there's been some slight criticism about that, and I acknowledge it, but there's not so much I can do, and I can promise the listeners that what you hear is, the best possible outcome in terms of editing and post-processing. Across the year, there were 30,000 downloads, which is great. And it's hard to get a sense of what happened this year specifically versus other years, but the audience is approximately, on the whole, about 1/4 to 1/3 American, followed by Germany, UK, Canada, France, Belgium, Sweden, Denmark, Australia, Netherlands, and Lebanon.
Well, there we go.
Just some more fun facts. We have about half of the listens come through Apple Podcasts, followed by about 15% on Spotify.
I'm a Spotify listener.
Yes.
That's me. I'm a total Swede, I'm integrating my life into Spotify.
And there's a whole thing around Apple iOS in the States versus Spotify and Android in the EU and across the world around the battle for podcast supremacy.
Yeah.
But maybe, are you one of the because when you have a podcast on Spotify, you can see what people who listen on Spotify, the music they listen to. And
I think you'd guess my musical taste.
Well, yes. So you don't account for Adele, Taylor Swift, Kanye West, Lordi, or Doja Cat.
I'm sorry, I have to laugh out loud. Maybe this will be edited from the final podcast. But no.
No, definitely not. I didn't think so. But these are, Adele and Taylor Swift are consistently among.
Adele is one of the 3 most listened to artists on Spotify.
Yeah,
and Taylor Swift maybe is number 2 even.
She had a big comeback this year. So not as many episodes as I'd like to get out. I have already at least 5 or 6 planned for next year. So the state of the podcast is strong in some respects, with
good stats
in the top 2.5% of all podcasts.
Really,
which I think says more about the number of podcasts that are out there on the interwebs than the actual.
I'll have an interesting comment for you later on, but I'm not going to give it away yet.
Okay.
About this podcasting business.
Yeah.
So be prepared.
I have noticed a bit, there's been more like tech and kind of social media oriented podcasts usually put out by certain centers.
Yeah, institutional accounts.
The Center for Democracy, this or that. And I listen to those and I find them kind of dry. So I don't know.
This is definitely not dry.
Yeah, I don't know. I like this probably because it's my tone, so to say. But so thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. If there were no downloads, I wouldn't do it. There's a guy, I'll say, a guy named Ian from Ireland, and he has interviewed 110 academic podcasters. And he's coming out with a book that is going to be just their quotes and an accompanying audiobook. Cool. And so when he publishes that book, I looked at the proofs. They look incredible. And it's like, a kind of nerdy niche, but I'm planning to do a bonus episode where I interview him on the book as kind of a fun fact about, I think, academic podcasting. It's a cool idea and something I'm obviously very passionate about. So thank you again for listening and supporting this little pirate ship as it
sails through the internet.
On the interwebs. But to the platforms.
So the first gift is platform stats overview, right?
Yes.
As per every year.
And it's usually this long 30, 45 minute segment. I don't think it will be that this year because I scouted around, and really I think because it's not an electoral year in the United States, we don't have too much political stuff to report. But there is some other interesting stuff we can talk about.
Well, it's interesting how much United States is driving the political content on these platforms, right? Because we did have a major election in Germany just less than a month ago, if my chronology is right. And that doesn't seem to have a major impact. But of course, there were no European elections either, no parliament elections either. Maybe that accounts for something. And yeah, China doesn't have elections, so that doesn't matter really.
But there's also this growing controversy and politicization of tech, right? And what I think is kind of the value of these year in review reports is not so much what they say at face value, but trying to really read between the lines and understand how platforms are, positioning themselves discursively, but also what they're choosing to emphasize, what not to emphasize, how they count the data, and what they choose to say in their year in review reports.
This is what you were saying, at least last year, I think, that these year in review reports are more marketing than actual reports.
Yes, I think so. And I think that apropos this year, Facebook and Instagram, as far as I could find, have no year in review
stats
reports.
Wow.
Instead, and Facebook did in 2020, as did Instagram, but instead Facebook released an end of the year threat report highlighting their work on coordinated and authentic behavior takedowns across the globe, which again I think is this kind
whitewashing
of discursive
themselves.
positioning. Now, this could be a fault of mine because if you type in year in review on Facebook, it's all about the feature where you, as your personal profile, can retrieve your year in review. So there's a bit of that, but I've checked their newsroom site, and I thought just to give some type of political discussion, because there isn't so much this year in the platform stats. I looked into this threat report and found a couple interesting terms that maybe would be interesting for the listeners to be aware of. The first time that I heard about them. One is the idea of brigading.
What does that mean in Facebook parlance?
This is when people work together to mass comment, mass post, or engage in other types of repetitive mass behaviors to harass others or silence them.
Hey, that sounds familiar from before. It's just now there's a new term for it.
Again, which is kind of this discursive positioning, right? There's now a name for it. And so the example of brigading that they talked about was they took down some accounts in Italy and France around the COVID conspiracy group V_V, which targeted medical professionals, journalists, and elected officials with mass harassment in Italy and France. Obviously, hard lockdowns there. And so we had brigading on one side and then also mass reporting, which is essentially the same phenomenon, except you have
a counter reaction, perhaps.
Mass reporting content. And so this was identified in Vietnam, where mass reporting was used basically against government dissidents. So the idea being that there's this coordinated and authentic behavior of the Vietnamese government potentially trying to silence activists through mass reporting.
This is actually not so uncommon. I had a student in one of my classes dealing with Indonesia, and apparently there's been a similar brigading coordinated maybe by the government actually for several cover-up operations, not related to COVID, but just at the same time as COVID, something about corruption in the government. And the way they would do it is to buy in, so to say, accounts that would switch the conversation away from the governmental potential accusations. So yeah, it's something there, and it's nice that Facebook gives us a term. I don't know if this comes from academia or is academia that's going to embrace it.
No, and I will say, so I braved the COVID storm, and it was at APSA, this very empty American Political Science Association conference this year, and I was at a reception with the Stanford Observatory, Internet Observatory people.
Yeah.
We're doing a lot of work. We had one of the researchers on the podcast recently talk about China and Russia. And I was very interesting discursive tip I got there, which was that it's not, what was it? It's not influence operations anymore. It's information interference or something along those lines.
Yes, I think I remember you saying something like that.
It's just like, just at this reception, it was like, if you're in the know, now it's interference operations. Or don't quote me on exactly what the term
I think information interference sounds more like it's not operations, because it sounds too concerted, right?
And I mean, to me, these taxonomies are kind of superfluous. It's a way to keep nuancing disinformation so that it's relevant. But we will see how long these disinformation studies go on.
Well, I think basically this is something that probably neither of us is going to really discuss in this year in review.
No, because I'm tired of disinformation and I'm tired of COVID. I don't want to talk about it anymore.
But we just have to acknowledge, obviously, this has been something that people have been very concerned and where social media and politics really have been generating a lot of discussions, let's say, around disinformation, misinformation, operations, influence, whatever, And there's a lot of research going on in this, in both how to spot this and how to correct this and how people react to this and possibly even the effects of this. But this is something that is so well covered, I think, by everyone else that maybe we don't need to talk about it.
Yeah, sorry. Can you pass the glug?
The glug.
Yeah. We're having a little mulled wine here.
Sweden.
In terms of this report, just to finish it out, there was coordinated inauthentic behavior found, for example, targeting Palestinians, which obviously relates to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There was some networks found around the Belarusian KGB, targeting users in the Middle East and Africa, which might have to do with the issue over there.
Very nice.
I think
we'll talk more about that.
There's a gift coming up about that. And China targeting English-speaking users and Mandarin-speaking users in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Tibet. So that was their kind of threat report. I don't know if it was really a year in review for them, but more of just a finger on the pulse of what's happening.
They used to at least reveal some fun facts, like which one was the most
Women's Day, and the Super Bowl. Yeah. No, they did it last year. I couldn't find it this year. I think they got too much going on.
Secretive Facebook.
Exactly.
I think they released some data that was then quite criticized, like about the most watched live streaming or the most read public pages and something like that. I believe there was some controversy around that. So maybe they just decided to avoid controversy altogether and not put out any data.
I think so. And I think it also relates to this meta change that we'll also discuss more
about later
in the episode. But let's move through.
So Facebook zero.
Facebook zero, except for gating and new nuances on CIB, coordinated inauthentic behavior, which is fine, but not much,
and definitely nothing new.
No. Google year in search. They always do the year in search. Last year was, I think, the year of why. Like, why is this happening? I actually have it somewhere in my notes, but this year was how to heal.
How to heal.
How to heal, how to be resilient, how to honor someone, how to save the planet. All about resilience and healing, which I think we see from at least our university is,
I was just going to say, we're
very much pouring money into sustainability and also the concept of resilience. Which may be the next iteration of disinformation in terms of like what academics focus on. So that's interesting. But digging a bit deeper into their reports, a couple of fun facts. Doom scrolling was searched more than ever this year.
What is doom scrolling?
Just this idea that you keep scrolling through negative news just to fulfill some strange need. As was, on the more positive side, people Googling impact of climate change and sustainability. So they are picking up. Yeah. There are some trends here, right?
Also remember that this year we had a COP meeting, the one in Glasgow in November, and that may be also a focal event that drives the attention and basically allows for this issue to be picked up both in social media, but also in traditional media. A lot of reporting about heads of state, delegations, like truly a world event. And that could also maybe influence the visibility of things.
Which I would love to see more Facebook giving us insight on, right?
Wouldn't that be lovely?
Just these top terms. In terms of politics, Mittens reached an all-time high in search, I believe in January, thanks to Bernie Sanders.
Yes, I do know that.
His meme with the mittens. So that was...
he was a meme.
Yes, he was a meme. And he comes up in a couple of these, that meme specifically, in a couple of these platform stats. But I do remember last year, and I checked, they did have metrics in this Google year in search report about most searched politicians.
Yes.
No longer a topic in this year, but what we could see is that United States Capitol was searched more than COVID-19 globally in January, which is kind of interesting, like the effect that the interest that people were showing in that event. But other than that, not too much to report.
I almost forgot that the Capitol insurrection, I don't know it's the proper name for it, happened this year It's like my time is so compressed that I really have to focus to segment when was 2020 and when was
I
2021.
know, I'm totally lost. I've totally lost it. I signed a document 2019 the other day.
Yeah, we want to erase this period, but indeed, I think that maybe is the reason why people on these platforms are so particularly cautious this time. The fact that one of these very, very important events that may have been coordinated through their channels is in the focus of so many people. Yeah.
And we'll return to that.
We'll return to that as well.
As a gift.
So stick around, indeed.
Just ending with, on Google, the most searched person this year was Alec Baldwin and the shooting that happened on the Rust set, the live round.
My God.
Terrible.
That's so
Terrible.
Unbelievable. This is like a plot in Agatha Christie.
Yeah,
Just like,
really is the
you
stuff
cannot believe this is true.
So, fun fact there. TikTok. Everyone's
very exciting. This is
darling.
the up and coming, right?
Yeah, the up and coming. Now, in terms of the discursive positioning, right? So how do they write about their year in review? What I found is that they really focus on creativity was the key word. So TikTok is the creativity platform and starting quote unquote cultural phenomenons, which is incorrect English. But anyways, that's what they're pushing, that they are the creativity and cultural phenomenons platform. Number one TikTok of this year was drone dancing. I'm not on TikTok personally.
Me neither.
So basically it was, there was this girl shaking her butt to some song and some guy goes so black girl doing some kind of twerking, right? And then this kind of white nerdy guy goes, well, I got a drone. And then he goes out and he films the drone like going around him and shaking his butt. So a little bit, so kind of funny.
It's a lot of humor on TikTok. I think that works quite well. And of course, there's some political content. We discussed that in one of the previous episodes. And I don't think that radically changed. But it is not a primarily political platform, even though recently there's been all sorts of potentially socially relevant discussions there. But I think primarily it is for entertainment and creativity.
So I wrote a book chapter this year on anti-Semitism on social media, and I was reviewing a lot of the literature about anti-Semitism online, and I found a study, like nothing against the authors, right? But like they were saying, the far right, we found kind of anti-Semitism on TikTok. Like you're going to find anything on TikTok when you're talking about that amount of scale. And and this is what I wrote in the chapters, that it's really not helpful to report. And I think even the Anti-Defamation League and the World Jewish Congress do this in their reports. They say, we found, X million number of anti-Semitic tweets. But like when you put it in context, we're looking at like literally 0.0000005% of content. Like, so yeah, if you look for anything on TikTok, you're going to find it. Child pornography, hate speech, pro-Trump, pro-Clinton, whatever.
It's not there where the power lies. Power, I think for me, the reason, and again, I'm not a user, disclaimer, I just did not want to be sucked into another social media platform.
No, it's highly addictive.
So I don't have it, but I was reading about the power of TikTok in economic terms. And it's not a political example, but I'm going to briefly summarize it because it just shows how it can affect worldwide sales of something. In middle of 2021, there was the anniversary of the Lord of the Rings first episode in the trilogy being launched. I cannot believe it's like 20 years ago. Oh my God. But anyway. And of course, there's so many fans of this series, of this trilogy of films out there. And on TikTok, there's been a trend, a hashtag that was trending about the one of the characters in the trilogy and the lipstick that their makeup artist that painted her face used on her. And that is called Black Honey, and it's made by an American cosmetics company called Clinique. Mm-hmm. And it's not a very popular lipstick, and it's not something specifically Lord of the Ringy or anything. But because there were a lot of people who wanted to honor the film by imitating the makeup style of this character, the sales of this particular product, of this particular brand, basically skyrocketed. I'm talking about 70 million items being demanded on the spot. Clinique issued statements, sorry, we're out of this particular item that was around since the 90s, like very old. Like, we're trying to compensate.
This is when,
and it's just like, no, angry people saying, we want this one.
But this is when brands can step in by hiring that actress and having her come in The Lord of the Rings. And we saw this with Peloton this year. I don't remember the exact backstory of it, but there was a TV series where someone dies on the Peloton, so they brought in like the Kim Cattrall or whoever it was to. I mean, there are ways to respond, just like political actors respond. Like when Donald Trump says something during the campaign, Joe Biden can fundraise off it. I mean, I think brands are becoming more aware, and I think this is going to be more an issue going into the metaverse in terms of. But we'll get to that. But you're right. Like
we should not underestimate the power of TikTok. This is basically what I'm trying to say with this minor example. Of course, there's probably much more interesting examples from outside this, niche content, but it goes for every niche content.
Yeah.
This was a massive campaign that was not commercially driven. It was totally grassroots driven, and it was initiated by people that had nothing to do with this particular cosmetics and didn't really care about this product at all outside this particular purpose.
Yeah,
but it did affect Clinique's sales in a significant way.
Because there's some aspect of, I think, TikTok uses the terms creativity and cultural phenomenons, but it's a trend-setting platform. So if you want to join the trend, you need the lipstick to wear it, right? And so you need to buy it, and who reaps the benefits? Clinique.
Yeah, and I think I read something about like we're very thankful for people for bringing up this 20-year-old at this point, character and evoke the way we try to recreate a proper representation and so on and so forth. But it's just like, wow, you'd never think of this. If you were Clinique trying to come up with this thing, it would never work.
Exactly. And so that's kind of if I was a scholar of online branding in the non-political space, that would be interesting. But
that would be a different model. But just to make a political twist on this, is it's possible that you, as a politician, can be marketable, let's say, on TikTok.
I mean, I think about Hillary Clinton and the kind of pantsuit politics and that. Like, there's maybe something there. But again, I mean, the generational gap, which is also something that features in quite heavily this year. It's just generations. And that's kind of implicit in my gifts as we move along. But I'll just end with TikTok by saying that, in connecting to your point, that they highlighted creators. They did have a section about, I don't remember exactly what they called it, but kind of getting around advocacy. They're basically saying that like the young generation who uses TikTok are socially aware, they're cognizant of their platforms and stuff like that. And they were highlighting like a list of 10 creators who were kind of doing social good. For example, there's one who kind of discusses Native American issues, another one who provides free beauty treatments to the homeless and kind of films that on TikTok, which is like, is that exploitation or not? I don't know. But there is some aspect of this doing social good. And I've seen some of these videos, not on TikTok, but like, the person who has a disability, who's like a car mechanic, and just like watching them do their work is like so inspiring. So I see the appeal in that for sure.
I would say one more thing about TikTok. You said this is not going to be a 30-minute segment, but it is going to be a 30-minute segment because there's so many things to comment on, like a spin-offs. And one thing that I wanted to comment that is valid both for politics and for everything that we've talked about before is namely the shareability of TikTok videos, where many other posts, many other platforms have their posts very customized to be viewed in platform. In particular, Instagram, like it's very difficult to share outside platform Instagram posts, right? TikTok is the most shareable of all the platforms that I know of. It's easily integrated into any potential digital platform that is willing to take, from email to YouTube, anything.
Even Facebook, what do they call them? I think Instagram is Reels. Facebook is
Stories.
Yeah.
No?
No, they have this new
Feature.
It might be Facebook Reels, but a lot of that is TikTok and cross-platform integration for sure.
But it's very interesting that TikTok did not bank on this proprietary way of displaying stuff, which was Instagram's, for example, trick. No, if you we want you to be on our platform. You cannot go away from our platform. You want to see everything in the platform. TikTok said, we don't care about platform. Just view our content.
With the watermark.
Exactly. Always there. Very discreet, right? Doesn't interfere with your viewing, but so easily spreadable. I have, as I said before, not joined the TikToker crowd, but I have seen a lot of TikTok videos through mediation of the other social media platforms, both for entertainment and for more serious commentary. So I think this is an interesting lesson in innovation that TikTok has hopefully taught the other social media platforms.
Yeah, and it makes me think, I'm sure there are some social media marketers listening who can speak more to like the challenges in doing like vertical video versus horizontal video.
Exactly, the tech part of it.
I think TikTok really made other platforms, like if you look at the way that these Facebook Reels or whatever they're called, like it's a vertical video, which is kind of TikTok's thing, and there's been like these poor social media managers, both for politicians and for brands. Like, they have to keep up with, there's this group, the Social Media Geek Out, where people post these like small changes. And I think that TikTok either fit the most broad appeal for cross-platform integration, or it forced changes in other platforms to develop Reels around fitting TikTok content into their platform, which is kind of an interesting.
The format of the Reel is borrowed by Instagram from TikTok, for sure. And it's also the one format that Instagram is promoting right now in terms of algorithmic visibility. And it's something that a lot of people just prefer. So definitely it's something that TikTok found. Lots of more things to come.
And to be fair, the TikTokers are more creative. Like what I've seen generated organically on Facebook is
not there.
Not there.
I mean, as an anecdote, and this is really my fun part about TikTok, is that I sometimes cross some squares in the city of Lund, where I live, and I have witnessed on my way back and forth to wherever I'm going several young people dancing and being filmed by another young person specifically for TikTok.
Did you see any drone dancing?
I have not seen, but the moves were pretty good, I must say.
Yeah.
So, apropos creativity, it's there, it's in the public space, and these young people are motivated to do so because you don't need any followers or this kind of follower-followee relationship. That's the interesting part. That's another technical and specific innovation, let's say, for TikTok.
Yeah, that algorithm boost.
Yeah.
And I mean, okay, we'll get into more generations, but okay, TikTok is a Gen Z platform, fine. When Snapchat stories first came out, there wasn't mass dancing, but there was a lot of creativity around your stories, and that was fun. And then just kind of died. And so
Snapchat has been growing hugely.
We'll get into it, but first, Pinterest. And Pinterest Predicts. Pinterest Predicts is their year in review version. So they use search terms and internal data from the platform to predict upcoming trends, which they claim they got 80% right last year. So this year, they pick over 175 trends that they expect. So they kind of put something on the line, right? They say, we have 175 trends, and this is what we think is going to define next year. And then we're going to check up and see whether we saw our predicted trends match.
Were we right?
And what's interesting is they divide these trends according to age demographics. So Gen X, Gen Z, Millennial, and Boomer. So these are trends like barkitecture.
What is that?
Which is designing rooms or your entire home around pets, which is driven by boomers. So they give you this.
Around pets?
Yeah, so like they may have a room might have a pedestal of stairs leading up to the dog bed. And that would be the centerpiece of the room. They can see this, people posting about it in their data. They say this is a boomer trend. Or
I must also laugh out loud.
Yeah, and I'll link to all of these year in review reports so you can get a little more context. Pinterest is very visual, obviously. They talk about Emotional escape rooms. For example, rage rooms. You know those?
No.
You never heard of a rage room?
I've heard of rage room, but not on Pinterest.
Yeah, so they predict
This is not the place to go for your rage.
just smashing TVs or whatever. Obviously, not everyone has that in their own house, but they talk more about like music theme roomed, crystal rooms with certain crystal properties. They say that's a trend across all age groups. And just one more example is a Hellenistic revival, which is driven by Gen Z of all people, showing an interest in ancient Greek jewelry, Aphrodite aesthetic, and even an increase in searches for Corinthian columns.
Wow, Gen Z, you go.
So nothing political there, but kind of interesting the way that they frame
Well, Pinterest is not, I think it is probably one of the least political of the platforms.
Except Stephen Smith saying that Pete Buttigieg should have used it to choose his wallpaper for his bathroom. Which was a funny quote, I think from last year. But,
Funny.
So 175 different trends there that are kind of interesting to check out. Moving on to Reddit.
Reddit.
The Reddit
That's more
recap.
political for sure.
Reddit recap, yeah. However, this year, again, like most platforms, was not. Reddit, basically, the top line was that it was dominated by cryptocurrency and, of course, Wall Street bets.
I was gonna say.
And I can include myself in that frenzy of following GME and AMC. But, I mean, when you think about Reddit, I remember last year they posted about how they had so much growth during the pandemic, but still traditionally it skews male and white. So it totally makes sense that these kind of white college-age dudes are interested in crypto and like beating the stock market, right? Retail investors. So not too much to report there other than markets, but other key topics were gaming, sports, weddings, food, and movies, which again, I think are kind of white dude topics.
Weddings?
Even weddings, because white dudes get married too.
I guess
And they get dragged
do.
along and they're probably posting more, venting about it than anything else. But not much interesting politically there in terms of Reddit.
Yeah, that's interesting that sometimes Reddit would be associated with some debate, right? Sometimes it's even studied for the purpose of identifying polarization. I was recently reading a study about that as well.
Well, the reason is that Reddit is one of the few platforms you can get full data on. So just like Twitter has been attracting a lot of academic attention, when Facebook shut down, people moved to Reddit, and what they kind of don't quite so much acknowledge is that, again, you're analyzing a quite specific demographic of people, I think. Of course, I think Reddit has gotten more diverse over Corona, but it's still kind of a haven of white middle-aged dudes, I think.
Well, then not much to say about
Not
Reddit.
much to say. Hopefully next year they'll get more in depth. They were really one of the
But they
platforms
didn't-
that gave so much country by country level data
And that's
last
what I
time.
mean. They did not have anything.
Which again might be a promotional exercise because they were maybe celebrating how
They
or trying
expanded.
to market how much they had grown last year, and this year maybe they saw those users leaving or whatnot.
Not the same increase.
Anyways, y'all
probably.
can go check out the link in the episode description and read it yourself. Snap.
Yes, the only thing I know is that it's up and running.
Up and running. They had a special year-end review report entitled Lens on the Year.
Well, very Snapchat.
The first ever Lens on the Year report, focusing mostly on augmented reality shopping experiences, but also creator-driven lenses that highlight, for example, the dangers of fentanyl.
Of what?
Fentanyl.
What is that?
This is this sort of synthetic drug that is kind of the new opioid crisis in the U.S., where basically warning users, again, it kind of has this TikTok vibe of our Gen Z users or Gen X users are into using platforms for social good. And one of those is communicating the dangers of fentanyl, which is basically if you are given a pill at a party, it's not going to be your traditional Oxycontin opioid, but it could be laced with fentanyl, and fentanyl has a very high overdose rate. Ooh. So I think this was called something like a song for Song for Charlie or something was kind of the lens that was developed to promote
In the honor of
awareness.
somebody who suffered from this.
Yeah, so there's really this focus on advocacy this extra parliamentary politics focus.
Wasn't it, I mean, probably you're going to get into this, but wasn't it that it was on Snapchat that they had a certain incentives for young people to participate in politics?
That is exactly my next point. The run for office feature.
Precisely. This is what I'm thinking about.
But before we get there, I should mention that Bernie Sanders mittens meme was a key AR lens that people could insert Bernie Sanders around their snaps. So he features again here. But yes, there was the run for office feature. I think this was the brainchild of Sophia Gross, who is someone I've tried to get on the podcast many times, but hasn't worked out.
Who is she?
She runs the kind of civic engagement work at
Snapchat.
And so these stats come from her Twitter feed. But basically the idea is that they developed this kind of feature within Snap, which is if you say, I want to run for office into Snapchat, you will be linked to all the necessary resources to get started. And in the first week that this launched, again, coming from Sophia's Twitter account, about 2 million people engaged with it.
2 million?
Yes. There were 24,000 candidate recruitment partner signups, which I guess is kind of, the first step into people being interested. And 46,000 users nominated a friend to run.
Wow, that's impressive. And I think it's quite interesting that Snapchat uses that political angle.
Yeah, I really think watching Snapchat over the years, they've seen the Google, Facebook, and Twitter just be in the hot seat with the Senate, and I think they really used this as an opportunity to say we're doing civic good. We're
learn by others' experience.
I think
right?
So.
Cool and good numbers. I think though, just because I try to provide this kind of counterbalance of the U.S. perspective, this was only valid in the United States.
Same with Facebook's civic engagement portal, Town Hall.
Town Hall, yes. I just want to comment because many listeners of the pod, as you already announced, do not have a U.S. connection, and many things that one wants to hop on are not available for people outside the U.S.
No, exactly. I tried to look at, the Facebook Town Hall feature, and it wasn't available to us.
And I think my students knew about this Snapchat and the idea of running for office, and that was not available to them here in Sweden. No,
definitely not. Totally right.
So.
Okay, last platform, and I overlook YouTube because I didn't see so much there. Maybe there was something, but it's always like PewDiePie, etc. But let's go to Twitter. Hashtag only on Twitter. Last year it was what's happening or what happened. This year it's only on Twitter. So a little bit of political stuff here. Top liked tweet was Joe Biden's inauguration tweet. I forget exactly what it said, like New Day in America type stuff. He got 4 million likes. And number 4 and number 5 were both Barack Obama and Kamala Harris similarly around the inauguration. So Joe Biden
that's a big event, right?
Congratulations to my friend Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris was ready to get to work. Number 2 was a BTS selfie.
Always.
And number 3 was from the Twitter official account saying, hello, literally everybody, when Facebook's products went down. Remember, there was this day in October where like WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook went down, and so I guess Twitter saw they had an influx of users. And so.
I remember this. If I may interfere for a moment of comic relief, because I follow many people on Twitter. One of the persons I do comes from the Balkans, from ex-Yugoslavia, and she made such a funny tweet that I think spoke to so many people. It's like, hi, Mom, Messenger is down. So I just want to let you know through this platform, I'm well. And even if it's cold outside, I did put on my gloves and hat. Because, it's exactly this shock when you take the private Messenger, like Facebook Messenger interaction, and that's the only way you can reach your folk is to go public. And everybody, like the amount of comments, like this wins the top tweet of this, Messenger or pause period, whatever it was, because it's like taking a very private world and putting it on Twitter, and it has a comic effect.
Yeah,
But
no,
it was not
but
the intended one necessarily.
I've been, you've seen that. I've been fiddling around with these privacy settings, like
Bazzera.
yeah, I changed my name on Facebook just to see what it would do. I kind of created some new accounts to see if I could migrate exactly that, because I'm tied into the messenger infrastructure. It's how I talk to my parents, for example. I was wondering, can I migrate that to like a throwaway account that only they would know? And I've been playing around with these different things, and it's so, I realized like I cannot leave the Facebook platform.
Oh my God, that's a terrible feeling.
It is, but it's so interesting when you actually try to do it, and then you try to like mobilize your network to be like, hey, let's move to Signal, or let's move, or just contact me here at this fake. Like I created this absolute complete
fake account.
Yeah, it was like the picture was a stuffed animal, and then I just and no one would accept my friend request.
No, of course.
And even when I told them it's me, they said, "Mom, this is weird." Yeah. So and you only really feel the power of these platforms when you try to do that. So that's why like all my accounts are messed up, and I really don't care personally, as long as I can like
but it's
call my
interesting.
mom or dad, whatever.
This is the problem, right? With this Facebook erasure, and I know several German friends, acquaintances that have successfully withdrawn from Facebook, but there in Germany, there is more of a mindset of getting out of these major platforms.
I would be lying if I was to say that I wasn't inspired a little bit by that when I was down there.
Several German friends and acquaintances that I've talked to. I also was recently in Germany, talked to a lot of random people in a sense, and a lot of them did not have an account at all on most platforms except for Twitter. But Twitter was mostly used for, let's say, listening. Yeah, just because most of the people I would know, they would be academics, so they would try to follow the conversation on several topics, but they would never post anything, and Twitter doesn't have a chat function, really. So they were very, very keen on that privacy angle.
Yeah, and it's really hard to pull out of that ecosystem because of all the network effects, basically. And
that's the Facebook power.
Yeah, you think about it, but then when you actually try to do it, you really are like, I have no option here. I either go dark, and go complete on.
But then you leave your networks.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Especially, again, I speak probably for both of us. We have very broad networks spanning continents and time zones and everything, and it's very difficult to get everyone on board of the same alternative app, if not for Facebook.
Yeah, I remember I had a friend who tried GroupMe, and then I was also like, hey, this GroupMe's functionality is terrible. But if you look at a platform like Signal, the group chats are very similar to Facebook Messenger. It's just like, it's funny when you think about in terms of the cost to download Signal, register, or Telegram, or WhatsApp, or whatever it is, register and use. I mean, this takes a matter of 5 minutes, but it's too much of a barrier because everyone else's network effects.
This is the reason why I have about like 15 apps on my phone that I only use with specific people. Like if I want to reach out X, I know I have to go to platform Y and so on. I have this very cumbersome.
This will come back in a gift.
Yeah.
Later.
Well, what do you guys think? I don't know if anybody who's listened to this either live or later on in the recorded version, what is your experience with this?
So I think
I'm curious with what is it like besides like the super nerds that I think we are, is there another perspective, or anyone who listens to this is a super nerd?
Well, I'm just briefly checking out we have a little Facebook live stream going, and no one has clicked in, and I think I probably in this experimentation process messed with the page.
I believe that you have successfully hit it.
I have successfully done that. Yeah. And then we have a Twitter space going. And unfortunately, as I was explaining a little bit before the podcast, there's an interesting aspect of Twitter Spaces where it's only available through a mobile phone. So there's no way to invite speakers up and get your input into the recorded podcast, unfortunately. A little bit of a tech issues around privacy settings and also functionality of apps, which is fundamental. Let me.
Is there a wrap up?
Yes, there is a wrap up. Most retweeted tweet was a BTS tweet saying "Stop Asian Hate."
Very nice.
That was right under around 1
Excellent.
million tweets. Also, the most used hashtag on Twitter this year was BTS. But I want to give a special highlight out to Steve, podcast listener Steve. There are no Wendy's Nugs this year,
No.
but there is a French potato. Do you know this?
No.
So Steve, podcast listener, used to work in political ad space. Now he works more on the health communication side. Cool dude, bearded guy, likes metal. Steve went to France this year and with his wife and went to a French cafeteria chain called La Pateterie. The potato, or the Potato-riet, which is a cafeteria basically focusing on potatoes, or a deli focusing on potatoes. He tweeted that it was the greatest potato ever made by human hands.
Oh my God.
And it went pretty viral, I think 26,000 likes. And started a small culture war on French Twitter about how, this American guy comes to France and he has this potato in like the equivalent of a Chili's, as Steve said. Steve was like, I don't care. This is the greatest potato I ever had. And so congrats to Steve. He got some press and a lot of like sort of
French-speaking world?
In the French-speaking world, but also I think the Daily Mail, and also these kind of like Time Out and Eat Out
Twitter
San Francisco.
actually is not, just also as a side comment, Twitter does allow for funny things to go viral. Just because you mentioned Tom had a viral tweet. I wish Tom that you could be heard in some way or another.
I was thinking there was Steve and there was Tom with the Belgian guy trying to get out the car.
No.
The car going into his house?
No.
Was that this year?
No. The one I'm thinking about is like, don't meet your idols. And there's a guy with a Ralph Lauren polo t-shirt and a policeman trying to wipe
from
his
the
head.
kind of protests that were happening, yes.
Of course, it was a Photoshop image, but the joke was very well done. And I think that was the most viral content that I know of a person who made it. Yeah, like Tom, kudos to you. And go see that post. It's really funny. Twitter enabled this.
Yeah,
and
that was I want to say the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It was like huge. And I think in general, Twitter and humor go very well together. On my way over to this meeting, I was stuck on the train because that's Sweden. Hello, everybody. Anyway, and I was perusing Twitter, as sometimes the habit is, and I see one of the funniest tweets, which is connected to the British scandal related to a garden party.
I've seen it.
And a Christmas party. And one of the tweets that dominated my Twitter feed was, so we will have a cabinet meeting instead of a cabinet, a cabinet meeting. This generated, I bet you, 1,000 spin-offs. Like, play words on brie cheese and lots of other
cultural phenomena.
It was so funny. And it was political, but also humorous. Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. It's this. I don't know if that's a double entendre or exactly what, but like, it's the play on words.
Play on words. I think that's like, hi, I see you. Was it a wine cabinet? It's like, there's not of whining on Twitter these days. Just so much fun to get the governmental critique in it. So Twitter has actually quite a bunch of funny and clever one-liners.
Absolutely. And I have a last thing, as I would say, I checked Pornhub as well, which is always a fun thing. And there was nothing about politics except that during the Meta outage, when Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp were down, they had a spike where they estimate that about 500,000 additional users during each hour that Facebook services were down.
Wow, that would be a bonus for Pornhub if Facebook would disappear.
Exactly. So not so much politics this year, but some interesting things to throw out. Hopefully you who are still with us got some interesting insights out of that.
Yes.
And let's move on to your first gift.
I am almost ready. Just give me a second to access all my data about what I'm about to say. I would also
Appreciate a little fill of the glug.
fill of the glug would not be all wrong. Thanks to the thermos, it's still actually warm. So the thing that I want to bring up is kind of in the continuation of something that I mentioned in the last year's podcast. And that has to do with something very located elsewhere than the United States, which is also a little bit what I'm aiming to do. We're going to Belarus. Belarus, a country that I have never visited, but a country that I implicitly know a lot about because it's been at the center of a lot of political discussions, in particular over the past 2 years. And the reason why this is relevant even for our discussion in the end of the year review here on Social Media and Politics podcast is because it kind of is at the intersection between politics and protests. And at the intersection of these two things, we find one app, and that's called Telegram. We already did a bit of an overview about Telegram in last year's episode, so obviously refer to that if you want to know more about it. I hope it suffices to say here that the Telegram app was founded by the owner of Vkontakte, which is Vkontakte is called, which is like the contact network for Russian speaker universe, the equivalent of Facebook in many ways. This person, former owner of Vkontakte, moved and created Telegram. And there are two specific features of Telegram. One, and most important in the context that we're discussing it, is that it is highly encrypted. Really very difficult to crack unless you are a member of the platform. And two, is that it offers the possibility of disappearing messages. So there is no trace left of some, let's say, coordinating type of protest activities that anti-governmental forces would want to plan. So that's why it serves a specific function in this universe of platforms. And this idea, like the name says it all, like it's Telegram. You send a telegram, it's very short, very concise, and then it disappears.
Point to point.
Point to point, exactly. Telegram does allow for what they call channels. So we talked last year about something called Nexta, which was in Belarus the major alternative news channel with over 200,000, which is the upper limit for Telegram channel users.
200,000 is the maximum.
Maximum, yeah. You cannot have more than that. And Nexta was reaching that level of popularity because both media junkies, Belarusian, and probably a lot of police and secret service were trying to infiltrate that, right? So last year there was a lot about Telegram being a platform for organizing protests against the Belarusian leader Lukashenko, what is called Europe's last dictator, a remnant from almost the Cold War, not quite, but almost from that time, and a guy that is having a very firm grip on the country in terms of political expression, freedom of expression, and so on and so forth. When last year we were talking about this, I was still optimistic, I believe, in my take on the protests. This year, I have to be very clear, this optimism has evaporated. There is nothing optimistic about it anymore. So the trend that I spot here is the reverse. Telegram, instead of being a vehicle for freedom and for emancipation and for pro-democracy action, has become the sign of risk-taking due to a new law introduced in Belarus just some months ago, depending on exact time, but in the fall. The authoritarian regime there has made it a crime to use channels that are banned as promoting disinformation on Telegram. So the police is able to confiscate your phone, you have to give permission for them to see which Telegram channels you follow. And if one of the channels that you follow is one of the banned because it's promoting alternative views of reality, basically unwanted news by the government, you are likely to be held in prison without any trial for 15 days.
And is this something that is like specific to
Belarus.
But is it specific to Telegram as
yes.
a platform? It's
Yes.
not like, hey, if you're tweeting about...
No, not so much. It's a Telegram. I guess the government, because they probably send their spies in, what have you. They realize that this is the primary medium through which anti-government protesters organize themselves, and so they intervene in that way. And the perverse sign of this is that for each channel discovered on your phone, you can get an extra 15 days. So should you, let's say, be involved in getting information from 3 banned Telegram channels, you could get basically 15 plus 15 plus 15, basically a month and a half of being in prison without trial, without any need to justify you being kept there. So obviously this is a terrible, terrible blow to pro-democratic activism. So that's one thing, but I'm staying in Belarus because this is another way in which Belarus and Telegram intersect, and that is maybe something more specific for 2021. So not a continuation of the protest, but the migration crisis at the border between Belarus and Poland.
Yeah, this is a mess, huh?
It is a terrible mess. Of course, this is not something that comes out of nowhere. This is clearly a strategy used by the authoritarian government to mess with, provoke, attack, whatever you want to use the word to describe the anti-European position of Minsk. In this particular setting, allowing refugees from the Middle East to freely enter and travel within Belarus up until they reach the border to Poland, and where they are stopped. And the conditions under which they live, of course, they are very, very tragic and traumatic. From the point of view of social media, though, there is an interesting thing to bring up, though, because several journalists and reporters have been on the ground talking to the people there, talking to their connections back in Iraq. It seems that a large proportion of the people at the border come from the Iraqi part of Kurdistan, so they're Iraqi Kurds, and they use Telegram to be informed about and coordinate action in terms of migration. So I was reading an interesting report from the BBC World Service looking at reportage on the ground, and I just want to read some quotes from the people that the British reporter interviewed at the border between Belarus and Poland. Basically the messages that were present on Kurdish Telegram and on some Facebook groups having thousands of members, were informing migrants to head to a specific single location. And this is a quote, "The convoy of hope stands here on the map marked with a red balloon, read one message, repeated several times in a group called Iraqi immigrants." And another quote sounds like this: "Tomorrow at 9:30 behind the station, all be ready for a few hours, then leave," read another. "So please join, it's the only solutions." So this is actually an example of how Telegram has been used for refugees and migrants themselves to try to coordinate and joint action because they wanted to replicate the refugee what in Europe is called crisis, the refugee attempt to en masse enter Europe in 2015-16. And so the reasoning is that the paralyzing numbers, if we're large enough here, they will open the borders for us. Individual people will not be let through, but if we're a massive amount of people and a diverse group, there's people with families, with newborn babies, like really terrible, terrible situation there on the border, then they will see us and then they will open the border. So this is a case in which Telegram has been facilitating this, what we know obviously in the literature as connective action, right?
But doesn't, I'm thinking about exactly what the Facebook threat report was saying, which is, and what you're saying about the Belarusian government, penalizing specifically Telegram, how do we know that these messages were sent by actual, migrants rather than a coordinated inauthentic behavior kind of rally point to get migrants to show up at one place, as is kind of at least what I've read of the media narrative is something about, a coordinated move to put pressure on the external borders of Europe. And so is Telegram a necessarily pure channel for migrants to coordinate?
It seems obviously there's no one yet to know, and a problem with studying Telegram is precisely the ephemeral nature of the messages posted there. So researchers don't have access to a sample or a full even.
Though I learned down in Germany that I believe public groups, which is like some type of space within the platform, I believe there is some way to get them. I don't know if it's a public API
there's some settings, but from my reading, a lot of the protesters and a lot of the migrants do not want their groups to be permanent, right? Because imagine the police confiscate your phone, like, what are you doing? What is on this channel? They don't want to leave any traces, and that's the reason why there is not a lot of data about these sensitive topics. Why is this important? Of course, this is an year in review. Why is this important? Well, it's important obviously at the first level because we have yet another proof of social media being used for connective action. But I want to take this academic take and basically relate to a paper that I recently read, which is authored by a bunch of people. I'm going to quote them really quickly just to give them a shout out. Philip Lorenz Spreen, Lisa Oswald, Stefan Lewandowski, and Ralph Hedwig, who do an overview of the academic literature on the connection between digital media and democracy, which is obviously one of the perennial topics of the Social Media and Politics podcast. This overview of the literature basically shows something that we already know, but in a very systematic and very broad scope way. The review finds positive relationships between digital media use and two primary variables, which is political participation and information consumption. So that is increasing because you use social media, but some other variables may be seen as having a negative impact on your democracy score because you use social media. And we're looking at trust, which is declining, populists being at an advantage, and the polarization. In our context, which is Belarus and this type of double conflict going on in the country at the moment, is interesting also to relate to this paper because they note the tendency of social media benefits is to occur more pronouncedly in authoritarian regime, obviously Belarus being one, and in emerging democracies, whereas the threats appeared most pronounced in established democracies. Of course, there will be a link to this in the show notes. And for you, Michael, maybe you can also just take a look at the map. You see, it's quite interesting to locate on the globe the importance of social media. And of course, listeners don't necessarily see this map, but I can describe it, that the country in the world where social media has the most effects, either positive or negative, is unsurprisingly, obviously, the United States.
Yeah, there's some kind of, it's a list of countries, and it's the effect of social media on democracy.
Positive
somehow,
or negative.
Basically, a huge outlier, the U.S., and maybe second, South Korea, which obviously has
a lot of internet connections. It's just like, US. And then China a little bit. But it is, in a sense, going to, again, taking this academic high road, maybe to some extent it is justified that all these studies over the years have been looking at the US because they have this very clear effect. At the same time, a lot of studies are done in the US, so maybe this biases the academic literature, right? So it can be a two-way street. However, also the stats that you revealed and the general trend over the 6 years of the pod clearly show that a lot of the social media effects, because of various structural conditions, are more visible in the United States and in Korea, perhaps, compared to other countries where regulation and limitations, either technological, infrastructural, or legal, play a role in limiting the reach and the power of social media platforms?
Yeah, and cultural too, right? I mean, we always
What do you think about culture?
we talk about this the polarization in the U.S. I mean, and there is, but it's also it's a two-party system that this we call it effective polarization, this hatred towards groups is very easy to form when you have a clear enemy, right?
Yeah.
The social justice warriors versus the Trump racists, and the whole culture wars thing that social media probably exacerbates.
Exacerbates, that would be the word.
But really, you put it in a multi-party system, and it's really hard to find that clear enemy. I mean, we saw a little bit of it with the populists versus the non-populists, but that kind of went by the wayside for the most part. So I don't know.
I'm trying to find the UK in this list, and I cannot find it. But that would be probably another example of a two-party system where you could see traces of this social media.
I agree, but then they also had this Brexit dimension, which is not necessarily tied to Tory labor dynamics.
So definitely something to ponder over in terms of effects and measurable variables that we can see. Clearly, though, we know already that in authoritarian and emerging democracies, social media has been a force for democratizing. And think about Arab Spring in 2011-13. Think about all sorts of revolutions that have been taken to the digital space. They have been carriers of the popular voice, the popular desire for change. Whereas I think of many examples in established democracies, as the study also refers to, where disinformation and this type of complex terminology you named before applies more so than mobilization for democracy.
Information interference. I think that's what it was. No, hearing this gift as I unwrap it, I think about. I mean, first there's a couple interesting angles here. One is the growing crisis at the Belarusian border, which is probably not disconnected from the growing crisis in Donetsk, the Russian-Ukrainian border, which, as maybe Americans living in the U.S. think about. The anniversary of January 6th, I think there is a more pressing concern here in the European parts of the world, which is about growing Russian aggression. Is it a real military buildup? Is it a negotiation tactic? Whatever. But I wonder, I think about this picture of Aylan Kurdi, which was the last kind of migrant wave. There was
the most recent.
That picture really triggered concrete responses from Angela Merkel and the German government.
For people in general.
And so I think we see, in a sense, a repeat of that. And on the one hand, we have, as you're saying, Telegram as a coordinating force for migrants, but also we know that it's not, maybe they're segmented in their encrypted enclaves, but there's also a clear move from the government to prosecute based on Telegram use.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So first of all, I guess my point is, number one, where is the social media coverage of the migrant Belarus aspect? It's kind of in the news, but not really. And then number two is what's going on with Telegram there? This idea that encrypted apps are these encrypted safe spaces, I guess, is technically possible. But there's also political and legal forces that interact with that encryption, which is quite interesting. Just thinking out loud. I have no answers.
No, this is a lot of questions. I think it also opens up for a lot of avenues for further investigations. And I think just looking at the literature overview, the article that I quoted, the fact that we have so much information about the United States and, in a sense, so little information about other countries, between anything like Mexico or Turkey or I don't know, South Korea is maybe a little bit more studied, but even Australia. So English speaking, but there's just not a lot of studies that use data from those areas.
And I will say on that point, though, on this general disinformation kind of vein, this is also something I've been thinking about recently, is that Sam Woolley, who was on the podcast in the very beginning, and Philip Howard and his guys at the Oxford Internet Institute, I mean, they've really...
The computational propaganda group.
It's very commendable what they've done they've looked exactly at some of these understudied contexts like Mexico or Philippines, I don't know. They've done a very worldwide focus, but they shine a spotlight on the negative aspects of social media. Or let's think about the genocide in Myanmar.
Yes.
Right? I mean, so when there's this like global scope of social media research, I would argue that it's biased towards negative engagement, which is not necessarily the full story, right? Like you have to weigh that against, it's all about hate speech or this or disinformation. And I mean, if the purpose of your study is to find out like what is social media use in Mexico and you focus only on, you know, government use of bots, well, that's not the entire picture. And so there is potentially a negative bias in non-US cases towards negative social media engagement. There's all to throw out there for discussion. I don't have a full literature review, but...
It's interesting, anyway, food for thought. And of course, in the context of COVID, there is even more to think about. I have fragmentary information covering this type of discussions in non-European or non-Western contexts, and it is a lot of disinformation going on. Or you would probably call it misinformation in the sense that it's not coordinated with the purpose of disrupting. It's simply wrong information circulated because some prominent people in the network embrace it. And that has obviously costs in human lives. So it's a lot of things to unpack, but just going back to wrap up fully my gift, this is what I wanted to highlight perhaps most, that one, Telegram is another interesting app to follow that has some particular properties, particularly going down to your privacy interests, right? Like maybe you should be a user of Telegram, Michael.
I have become one just
to test,
just in Germany, because that's the only place I could reach people there.
Exactly.
And I can tell you from Berlin, if you want to get your mushrooms or your hardcore drugs, then Telegram is
well, obviously because it's a secret platform. You can be far more confident on Telegram than on pretty much anything else, maybe with the exception of Signal, that your messages are going to be inaccessible to authorities if you want to escape that. So that's one thing that I wanted to highlight. And the other one is this idea that social media has been used for the benefits of democracy or to promote democracy in authoritarian and emerging democracies. And it has had quite negative effects on democracy in the established democracies world. And with this, I'm ready to take a break and pass the baton for your second gift.
Yes, and I realize as I'm sitting here kind of fiddling with the Facebook Live, I did actually make the page invisible.
That is point. Not...
Well, no, it's not great. So,
do you want to remedy that?
No, I've clicked things, but I mean, I'm so. What you just said for your gift and where I'm going to go. This is going to be a stepping stone into something that actually, as in the process of forming these gifts, I really have a small epiphany, I would say.
Oh, right.
In terms of platforms and social media, and exactly this question of Telegram in Belarus, exactly this question of all these platforms and their year in review reports. I mean, there's something about, I'll tease it a little bit because we'll get to it. But it's emerging just in my kind of background research for this, but also where I think things are going. But my second gift is going to be a hybrid gift on both Meta. The change of Facebook is unavoidable.
Meta, not feta.
Yeah, and Founders and the myth of the lore of the Silicon Valley founder.
I must say that this 2021 has been a good year for the Greek alphabet and for the Greek world. I have several Greek friends who cannot not make jokes about this. There's a lot of memes in Greece about Facebook being called Meta and a lot of laughs. Because meta means above. In current Greek, I know that you speak ancient Greek or read ancient Greek, but in current Greek, it means just like above or besides. So like, are you my meta? Like, are you sitting on the same couch as me? Yes, we do.
That was a Pinterest bestie aesthetic when you wear the same bracelets.
Braces, oh my God. So that's, and then all the COVID variants like Alpha, Beta, Delta,
which I will say,
Omicron.
A fun fact, and like, I tweeted, I tweeted about it at some point, and then I got some flack from some dude on the internet. It was like, which was like,
Greek dude.
Well, no, it was interesting because they had the Mu variant.
The what?
Mu, M-U.
The Greek letter.
Yeah,
Mu.
so they had the Mu variant, and they skipped Nu and Xi.
Xi, I think it's a rather obvious
which
reason.
is actually Latinized into KSI, not XI. But anyways,
that's how you do it.
Or maybe the modern Greek is. But the funny part is that the World Health Organization, from
official sources,
reported through the New York Times, was that Nu, the new variant.
Yeah, it's like very confusing.
It
What
might
is the
sound
new?
like what is the new variant?
Yeah.
The Xi variant was skipped because it's a common Chinese last name, and therefore,
obviously, I think a billion,
they have
500 million have it.
They have a policy that they don't want to create. Again, think about
course,
BTS, Stop Asian Hate. But the Mu variant, according to the online databases I looked at, is actually a more popular.
The MU.
Yeah, Mu is more popular of a last name than Xi.
However, China's
Xi
president
was banned, and
Mu, the Mu never really kicked off. I think we're going straight into Omicron.
Right. Because we skipped Nu and Xi, and Xi obviously.
The joke is always like,
But of course, I get it. Hey, look, if it was the Biden variant, you don't want to use the name of a world leader. I get it, but don't cite the reason that it's could affect many people who have that last name when you used Mu, which was more popular.
It wasn't
name
so
than
popularized.
Xi.
I don't think there, at least to my knowledge, a lot of people called Omicron. But anyway, the Greeks are having a good year in terms of the visibility of their language. Unfortunately, not a very good year overall because of the COVID situation. So back to you and to Meta. This was a side comment.
No, we are rambling, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, it is on everybody's mind, though. I'm sure
it is. So
we're just speaking out.
I wanted to address a little bit the meta. I don't have the answers. I don't know what the metaverse will be, but I thought to connect it a bit more to the idea of founders. And so the interesting kind of dichotomy is you have Jack Dorsey leaving Twitter, and you have Facebook basically reinventing itself as Meta. So these are two different ways to go as a founder. So I think when we look at Twitter, I mean, it's very laudable how they have been so engaging with academics. They've been so open. They've released.
They give they get a thumbs up from
huge.
Academics.
Right. They've also seen relatively stale user growth, especially after Donald Trump gave the platform a big boom. But basically, if you look at the numbers, Twitter users are about 210 million daily active users.
How much? 210?
210 daily active users. So many listeners may have heard 300 million. That's probably monthly active. But anyways, 210 daily active users and a market cap of 34 billion. Meta, now rebranded, stands at around 1.9 billion users.
Daily users?
On Facebook only, and a market cap of 925 billion. So we're looking at Twitter being roughly, in terms of users and market cap, about 5%.
Oh my God.
Facebook, not even Meta, right? We're not counting all of these things. So, I mean, there's also the Facebook papers, which I want to kind of roll into this gift, which I think, I mean, in hindsight, they detailed some of the internal problems that Meta's products were experiencing, which is younger growth was stalling. People had accounts, but they weren't using them. And there was the whole like negative psychological part that I'm not sure about, I won't go into, but there were some problems with Meta's products in terms of how are they going to continue to grow. This is the kind of
question
the
of $1
founder
million
mindset,
or
right?
$1 billion.
You must grow your platform into infinity, which of course is impossible. So in hindsight, it seems like the push towards the metaverse, to me, the way that I interpret it, is a way to reassert Zuckerberg's founder role as a visionary.
It's a nice way to put it.
While also trying to appeal to the younger audience demographics that these Facebook papers have showed that
they lacked.
And so what I've read, all I can know about the metaverse is what I've read from some other, Tech Stack and Verge and different outlets, is that, the hip brands that want to appeal to these young users, they think, like Nike, for example, they think that based on probably
research
and also the trends of certain mobile games where people will, spend $1 here or two or $10 to buy. You think about your virtual character in Fortnite. People pay some an hour's worth of work at their job to get a specific avatar for their whatever. It's like a kind of fun thing. And so I think brands like Nike are kind of jumping on this as a way to get in early.
What do they do?
Expecting, I guess, that, again, I'm going into unknown territory here for me, but I think that they think people will be willing to spend money to decorate their virtual reality persona.
With Nike.
In the metaverse. And there could be some links to, you buy the shoe for $200, you get the avatar.
I can totally see that, actually. I don't think it's a far-fetched expectation from brands, as we talked about TikTok earlier. But it's interesting to think about this metaverse. I think I'll also have a little bit of a commentary later on about metaverse and all the connected things. But so I'll save that for when I really come in.
Yeah, I won't talk too much about it.
I'm just curious about this idea of the founder, and just to kind of pick your brain a little bit more. Now I'm getting the chance to ask the podcast host questions.
Well, so I've thought about it, and again, this is not my wheelhouse, so to say, but I do think that Facebook has seen their younger audience engagement dropping. They also look at probably Snapchat and their development of, like I said, Snapchat and TikTok are really owning this
new generation.
Probably Snapchat Gen X and TikTok Gen Z, but I think there is probably still, if I had to project an idea of a founder,
exactly.
Right? There is still this bad blood between Mark Zuckerberg and Evan Spiegel from Snapchat, because Evan Spiegel famously denied a Facebook buyout of Snapchat. For whatever, I forget the exact price, but this was seen as like and Zuckerberg was like, I'm going to kill your platform, and they introduced a feature, now we're going back.
Exactly.
2015, 16, they tried to basically emulate, I think, disappearing. They had a slingshot.
That's what
Facebook
it was.
Slingshot.
I do remember that vaguely, though.
Yeah, get deep. So I think there's still some bad blood between Spiegel and Zuckerberg. And I think that with Snapchat really pioneering the AR, augmented reality, for Zuckerberg, this is a way to basically say, I think it's just a twofold purpose. One is to create the immersive metaverse, and the other is to bypass all the work that Snap has been doing by saying AR, augmented reality, forget it. We're going in full virtual, and we'll get you that way. I think it's a minor motivation, but a motivation in the battle of the founder's mind. Right?
Funny, I really have no understanding about how founders think, but I just want to comment very briefly on Dorsey. I admire Twitter. I think at the very beginning of the internet era, many people, scholars before my age, so to say, they would think about the internet as a place for democracy and public sphere development and so on. Of all these expectations, I think Twitter is coming as close as we have it to this public arena of discussion and engagement. There's a dark side to it. I'm not going to deny it, nor comment too much about it. But compared to most of the other platforms that we discussed on this podcast now, or you discussed in your previous episodes, Twitter stands out as the public arena for more politically oriented discussion. And in that sense, I do think that Dorsey's vision, which was exactly this, came to be. Obviously, when you compare the numbers as you just did, this is not a very financially productive option. And I see the investors of Twitter probably raising eyebrows just as we speak. However, from a public good point of view, which is a different angle to the problem, I do think Twitter is making a great success.
No, but I think this relates to something that Dorsey, as a founder, will pursue, which again is something that I'm thinking about actively, and this conversation is very much helping to illuminate, which is the idea of Web 3. And we'll get to that. But first, sticking on Web 2.
Web 2.
We have what I'm interested. There's two things I want to talk about in this gift. One is the idea of the metaverse, and the other is the idea of the founder, which maybe is proxied by the 10x developer. So I'll take the metaverse aspect first.
Okay.
So we have Dorsey leaving to go do Squarespace and blockchain Web3 type of stuff, which I'll get to later. But then we have Zuckerberg really saying, I'm going to take this massive, almost 1 trillion market cap company, yes, and I'm gonna reinvent it. And I think it must be connected to the problems he's seen in growth, right? He wants to activate growth again and take some of this TikTok and Snapchat market. An interesting thing to watch, I think, which is maybe relevant or may not be relevant, is the Facebook's Ray-Ban stories.
What is that?
These are eyeglasses that Facebook has developed. They're basically the Snap spectacles.
Oh, and Google Glasses too.
And Google Glasses. So Facebook has Meta, and I've heard some sad stories about people who have papers, academics who have papers in review that they need to go and clean out and make sure that when they refer to Meta, they refer to the parent company. When they refer to Facebook. So my heart goes out to y'all. But there is, I believe it was released in September, October, there is the Facebook glasses that will essentially take video cameras from a POV point of view. Yeah. And why would Facebook do that?
That's a legitimate question. Why would they do that? Why would
Snap
they imitate
Spectacles was a total fail. Yeah. I'm probably one of the few people who owned them, and I thought they were actually very cool. So for those who don't know, Facebook partnered with Ray-Ban. They took the Ray-Ban Wayfarer's model, which is an iconic Ray-Ban's design. And they put a camera in that you can take videos and you can upload it to your Facebook store.
That sounds just like Snap Glasses.
Yes, it is exactly the same thing, except it's not a goofy Snap thing. It's under the.
But what would you do with that? What would you do with the outcome of the recording?
You would probably post it to your story, or you would post a cool video or some kind of. We've seen the iPhone cameras do this, where you can click and move it slightly around 3D, but it's not really type of thing. So. Reading about this, it's interesting because this could be a beta test, and this is getting very speculative, but this could be a beta test to see how to push Facebook/Meta hardware to the public. Because if you want to access the metaverse, you're going to need the Oculus
hardware
or other ways to. How does Facebook distribute the hardware it needs to market? And what's interesting is that Facebook has no retail outlet infrastructure.
They only have to say it online.
Apple has Apple stores. Amazon has
Amazon.
its platform, and Microsoft does have a smaller number of retail stores. But Ray-Ban's retail deals could be a way. So this could be a pilot to see how can they distribute metaverse equipment.
I'm laughing because it sounds such a Machiavellic deal.
Yeah, well, and this is exactly how founders work, right? They're working at the top. So Ray-Ban's parent company is EssilorLuxottica AB, which is an Italian-French global company of eyewear, lenses, all these things. And so there is my speculation, drawing from a couple media sources, is that the Ray-Ban stories is kind of a pilot distribution mechanism to hammer out the deals of how can Facebook tap into Ray-Ban parent company supplier to get there, to build a retail outlet.
Can I ask you though, just because you seem to know more about this, do the glasses that Meta is proposing have the shape of the Wayfarers?
Yeah, they have the shape. They're just Wayfarers with a camera.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, so that's where the two interests combine.
You can get them prescription-wise, but it gets all down to what percent of each sale goes to the distributor versus the brand versus so it's...
You almost want me to move one of my third gifts to the second position to follow up on you on this.
Well, maybe.
So maybe I'll do that.
Well, maybe. So I would just say this is a story to watch. Maybe not. Again, I don't know, because there will be no metaverse without hardware, and Oculus hasn't done great. I mean, I don't think Facebook wants to go to Amazon because of the terms,
there's a competition between them rather than a cooperation.
Which could be when you talk about founders, you talk about a lot of testosterone and dudes battling it out. So
yeah, there's no female founder. What is that?
Yeah, there are some around
well, some who failed
and whatnot. But I think the diverging strategies. I just think these diverging strategies of Dorsey and Zuckerberg is something broader, maybe about politics of platforms. Zuckerberg has not let go of the visionary. He basically doubled down on saying, I will reinvent, whereas Dorsey says, I'm going to Squarespace. Which
Why now?
Also signals something about this love of the web, which I think he brought to Twitter in terms of, as you said, the public square ideal. I think he's going to take that into the web infrastructure side with Web3. But I want to point out...
What would be Web3 though?
We'll go into it. It's going to be blockchain decentralization. But I also thought of another Silicon Valley legendary type, which is the 10x developer. So
Give more background on this.
I read about this in Clive Thompson's book Coders, which I highly recommend. I think it was maybe overly focused on gender, but otherwise a really, really good book. So the idea of the 10x developer is that when coming into Web 2.0, where platforms were starting to develop, you can develop your software stack to bring users into your ecosystem, what's better? Do you want to have a team of, good developers, or do you want to have the person with the vision, the 10x developer, who can implement and basically code at 10x the rate of a mortal, right? So getting into myth territory. And so there was a large, as far as I understand it through this guy's book, that there was a difference between the 10x coder and the software team, whereas the team would collaborate and there'd be inefficiencies, whereas the 10x coder would just take it all upon himself, kind of authoritarian coder, and do it. But as the platform scaled, you could not just have the 10x.
Well, it's exactly against the culture of the coders. Again, not coming from the book, but just from interviews, if you want, with coders. Also based on a book that I recently read by a common friend of ours, Jakob Svensson, which is called Wizards of the Web, dealing with interviews of developers at all these companies. And one of the things that comes out is that the open source culture. They don't want one person to just sit there and do things. They want everyone to collaborate,
collaborative
test,
code,
exactly.
All that
so
stuff.
At least the way I would read the information I am aware of in this sphere is that the programmer developer culture is much more collaborative and much more I do my bit, you come and test me and improve it, because only together we can really do it so that there is no need for patches or errors.
Exactly. And this was something that was kind of, I think, figured out. If you've seen this, if you're looking for a series to binge, Silicon Valley, I think it's called, a Showtime show. They have all these. They have the founder in this Robinhood decentralized kind of crypto type platform, and they also have the 10x developer there. They have all these stereotypes. And exactly what you said is that what has become to be the predominant business practice is what's called continuous deployment, which was a paper published by some Facebook researchers and Stanford researchers, where continuous deployment is defined as the software engineering practice of deploying many small incremental software updates into production, leading to a continuous stream of tens, hundreds, or thousands of deployments per day.
I think this is exactly the reality that we're, again, my picture that comes from some other source than yours, but seem to, combine to paint the same picture.
Because when platforms scale, they need that. And what these researchers found, they basically tested the efficiency of this. And they said, it is possible to scale the size of an engineering team by 20 times and the size of a code base by 50 times without negatively impacting developer productivity or software quality. This was in 2016, the paper was published, probably researched in 2015 or 2014. So, if you take the idea of the 10x coder and you look at, okay, continuous deployment gives you 50x code base. That's 5 times, you need 5 mythical prophecies of coders to match that. They'd have to coordinate, which is impossible. So when it comes to founders, Zuckerberg seems to be rebranding Meta under this idea of the 10x coder or the 10x founder. Whereas Dorsey is like, I'm out, decentralized, I'm going to give power to my CTO, who seems to be more team collaborative based, which leads into a more decentralized ownership of the web, which will be my third gift. So I stopped.
You want to stop? I'm just want to check the name of this guy. I wanted to briefly comment on this, and then we'll move on to my second gift. This new leader of Twitter, Parag Agrawal, who is the former technical officer. And I think this is fantastic. Personally, I don't have any stakes in Twitter per se, but as an idea, I'm really vested in it, in the sense that is my platform of choice in terms of interactions. Also because it has a lot of interesting features, and the way the structure it works is just, it suits my needs, basically. And one of the things that I wanted to comment on in terms of the founding, like what does it mean to be a founder and all that stuff, is that it's interesting to have a technical officer that becomes the CEO. Because this person will bring with him, in this case, a wealth of technical knowledge and awareness about the capacities that exist and the ways that the capacities can expand, obviously, as they're future-oriented, and also a sort of realistic expectation about what can be done with Twitter. So if I were a Twitter investor, I would be happy about this change of hands. I think Dorsey, from the podcast that I've been listening to and whatever I could read about this change or a leaving of the baton to the next generation, he was done with it. He has some other ideas, and I think this is the idea of founder, and this is really going to be my final point. Founders are people who start innovative things. That's why they are founders. Elon Musk is maybe one of the most iconic, if I can say so, examples. There are many others in old school, like Ford, the inventor of the automobile. He was one of these guys, right? People who drive a technological idea to fruition, but they're not interested in the administration of things. Things are established, things are going well, things are popular with the public. That's fine, it's great. but they're no longer interested in that.
Yeah, and there's been some, it's interesting because there's been some discussion of this in terms of Jordan Peterson, this kind of psychological guru, right?
Yeah, I'm not really quite familiar. To be honest, I withdrew myself from the conversation.
I'm not entirely either, but he basically picks up on Nietzsche's great man theory, which is that there are these great visionaries, right, that emerge. And it's exactly that idea, is that you have these visionaries. I saw an interview recently with Trump, who was talking about Elon Musk as like, we must protect and cherish these
visionaries,
these great men. I mean, the great men. This is like Nietzsche philosophy 101, Zarathustra. I mean, it's like whatever. And
it's a very common theme in
history. And so the idea was that like if you multiply a populace by X amount, you will generate a number of geniuses, and those geniuses will.
This is the Stanford School.
And this seems ridiculous from where I'm coming from, but exactly what you're saying is that like founders. If we take the idea of great geniuses, this is how Trump was thinking about it. It's like great geniuses, so to say, or in the Jordan Peterson terms, they're visionaries, but they can't necessarily implement. You got to pass on to the implementers. And if you think about social media over the past 20 years, I'm sure the Parag Agrawal, the CTO, will have a much more in-depth understanding of how to implement ideas into practice versus like the Jack Dorsey napkin picture of him sketching out Twitter, right? So it makes sense to bring it on. Like, you had the idea. Now, how do you build it, pass it on? If you're a visionary, then...
Yes. I think it's interesting. This is also a side comment, maybe not going to make it to the real podcast, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think it's interesting the way people think about innovation. I have a lot of thoughts about this because I've been recently working on a MOOC course on AI and the future of work, and that partly deals with how computers and humans can work together to produce the world of the future, right? And I think it's overrated. There's a myth of this visionary. No visionary, Dorsey or Musk or Zuckerberg or whoever in the history you want to refer to, is alone. It's just that there's been a description of people in the media of whatever times they're coming from as, I sit around and I just came up with this brilliant idea. It's rarely that case. It's a question of a combination of factors that have to fall into the place. The visionary ideas, the investment, the spirit of times, the appeal to a customer base.
There was this to bring it to politics, there was this idea, we saw this presentation of Brad Parscale as the lone wolf, right? It's
exactly.
Like, you don't emerge just out of no infrastructure behind you, right? Or the infrastructure available.
No one is a lone wolf. This is from the literature on innovation. This is where I come from. And that is a pretty unequivocal conclusion. Even people that really have the determination and the circumstances to push for an idea don't come from zero. They have collaborators that may be taking a back seat because they do not want to be seen, like they're not comfortable with social media presence or media presence at all. And they just want to be involved in it. They want to create whatever they're doing. And the same with Elon Musk, the same with everybody. So this idea of founder, I think, is to some extent related to what you're saying, this cult of the genius. Cult of the genius is one particular man who is just like embodying every knowledge and innovation. It is, let's call it a romanticized picture. But with this, I'll stop because I don't want to drag on too much.
I would just add that this is not a this philosophy that has captured the imagination of Silicon Valley through, for example, the 10x developer idea, which probably has some truth to it back when
it started. Yeah.
But I mean, this idea of there is probably a connection between. I mean, the idea of the great man, the Zarathustra from Nietzsche, it's being relayed currently by Jordan Peterson. It's been picked up by Trump, which is why I bring it up. Yeah. But it's not a new idea. It's not a, I would say, valid or invalid idea. It's just not something that has been invented by Silicon Valley. It has historical origins in Germany, for example, is all I want to say.
Schopenhauer. Anyway,
Proceed.
so I'm ready to change the orders.
Yeah, we're hitting the almost 2-hour mark, so we failed at keeping things short again this year.
This will be heavily edited in the real version, I suppose.
It won't be actually, but are you switching gifts for the listeners?
Instead of with my planned second, I'm going because it fits very nicely with my third.
All right, let's do it.
My planned third becomes the real second. And the topic that I'm bringing is flowing very nicely, I think, or at least I want to think from what you just said, which is the combination of social media and politics and artificial intelligence. And the reason why I bring it up is not only because I think it is happening right now in 2021, but also because my interests have been in, making me read and understand much more about artificial intelligence over the past year. This is what I've been spending my Corona time with. So the question that is interesting to pose to everyone who will listen to the podcast is political communication entering what is known as the uncanny valley. Do you know about the
I don't know. What is the uncanny valley?
The uncanny valley is a concept that emerges from the arts, but is obviously easily transferred to artificial intelligence when something almost to 99% resembles reality, but is made up. And that gives rise to a certain rejection feeling from the receiver. So in the robotics field, for example, if you have a robot that doesn't look at all like a human, like dammsugare, Ian, I forgot. What is dammsugare?
Vacuum suit.
Vacuum cleaner robot, that is not considered a threat. People have them, I have them, and so on. No problem. If you have a robot that would look and behave and talk very much like a human, but not quite like you would tell it's not a human, that would provoke rejection and there would be no market, for example, for such robots. So that's the uncanny valley. And it's a very fine line to walk between being very credible in your artificial reproduction or recreation of reality and being not that, in order to create that distinction. This is fake. It's not a real person, it's a robot. Yeah. So will political communication go in this uncanny valley? Will they go along this line of mixing real reality with technically enhanced reality?
So is what you're saying, because I've read a little bit about this when I was looking up the metaverse, is that like one of the things is it's an all or nothing bet because you got to get it right, because even small distortions in the metaverse can trigger like epilepsy, for example, or
can put people off simply. Like just simply say like I don't want to be here. This is weird and uncomfortable. And psychologically, you would seek withdrawal.
Which is funny because I've seen some of these the early. We don't have the metaverse hardware yet, but I've seen some of these early like promos of Facebook where people were like, of course, like multiracial people are looking at a, picture in an art museum, and all of a sudden it's like they're tripping on mushrooms. Like they go into where the wild things are. Yeah, it's like,
do you want that or not? You see, the option of having it obviously is a show of technical prowess. So that's where a lot of the companies you mentioned before have an upper hand, particularly Facebook, that actively promotes this idea of a multiverse. And I'm not going to comment too much on multiverse because it would prolong this podcast significantly, and I don't want to go there. But what is really happening beyond the theories of it is like AI capacities really are building up. So not only is a dream of sci-fi writers, not only is a dream of movie makers, this is what we can actually see.
Can I press you on what is an AI capacity?
This is very interesting. I have you pressing me, and it's very good. I'll give you some example of what we can do today with some of the technology names that can be used in this situation.
I'm very skeptical. You know this from conversations we've had outside of the podcast of like AI, and I think all users listening to this podcast, well, I hope that they are skeptical of what AI is, because it's become this umbrella term that is like, to what extent is it computational versus what extent is it something truly not intelligent, but different than just computational modeling?
It is, at the very basic, any computational, as we label it, model is a statistical model. Yeah, it's a mathematical model. And so that's the ground of everything. It is about processing data in some statistical way. What is happening right now is that we have the technological infrastructure, which means the computer capacity,
Computational power.
the power, which is very expensive in terms of energy, for example, but we do have the computers, the mega computers, maybe we'll have quantum computers that will be able to provide us with computational model results needed to recreate an artificial world that is completely imagined and not connected to any real world, like touch and feel reality. So the technologies that I'm bringing up, just to enumerate some, see if you recognize any, right? There's something called face rig. Have you heard of this? Mm-hmm. Face rig, for all the listeners of the podcast, maybe you should check this out. It is a virtual character simulation software. This is basically used in creating any kind of true 3D and integrated into a reality software like Pokemon or something like that. Yeah, they use face rig. There is also motion capture, which has been used in films like Lucasfilms, 3D virtual imaging. Obviously, this is about scanning objects in 3Ds and being able to rotate and inside-out views of objects. And front projected holographic display, which is another way to say, like, we want to project 3D rotatable images of people or objects, as well as voice synthesis. And we also know that this is happening, that we can synthesize the voice and imitate the voice of others through computer means, also recreate other voices through computer means.
I've seen the Tom Cruise deepfake TikTok.
I don't want to go to the deepfakes. This is a whole different thing. I decided I'm not going to go there, but if you really want me to, I can go there. But my original gift did not involve deepfakes. It involved mostly creating what I call virtual persons. Virtual persons. So one of the things that I'm looking into my crystal ball and predicting to every listener of the podcast, and this is where my hat sits a little bit on
beam out to all the entire world.
Yeah, exactly. Is this idea, and I'm summarizing it as the birth or the true presence of the virtual politician. And what does that mean? And where does it come from? It comes from the technologies that I already mentioned. And these are very, very much available right now. This is not a futuristic thing. This is what happens right now. And one interesting fact to bring up is that in the Asian cultural sphere, and this is very broad, but just think Asia writ large, China, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, the virtual idols are really killing it.
I've seen this. I don't even think this Facebook page is visible. I've seen this band. I heard a podcast about this band that plays virtual shows.
I don't know exactly. We're not overlapping knowledge on this one. The idea is that in Asia there is a huge culture that the very first virtual idol was created in 1984 by the Japanese. Mm-hmm. Japan generally is the number one country in robotics and artificial intelligence derived persons. By far, like it bypasses pretty much everyone.
There is this.
So if you want to know something about AI and this kind of parallel reality, Japan is your go-to. It nevertheless created a counterpart in the Western world. And for anyone who is not a Japanese, even though again I salute all the Japanese. And I'll make a footnote. Yamaha, the piano and keyboard producer, is the first one to synthesize voice. And that software was fed into the first virtual idol.
Yeah, there is something. Yeah,
It's like amazing.
Again, I'm jumping in because I randomly, like, of all the podcasts I listened to, I don't know, maybe not this year, but there was something that was like, there is this synthetic sensation around these type of things, and they do project some type of
this is
band
real.
and it's like people show up to these concerts.
I think you're thinking about Mifune.
I think so.
It's a virtual idol in a female form.
Yes, I think this is it.
She has concerts.
Like big ones, not little ones.
But there again, it's beautiful and it's fantastic. I'm much more into J music in general. You know me at this point, Michael. So you know that I like this kind of stuff, and I admire the technical prowess behind this. Westerners have pulled from this resource, pool, and created their own, and probably the most famous virtual idol, virtual person that is not political, at least as of now, is a Instagram account called Lil Miquela. The full name is Miquela Sousa. And this is a female-looking character with over 3 million followers at the time we're speaking, probably growing as we speak. And it's a highly realistic computer-generated image that is fully integrated in real-world reality. This is the interesting part, that honestly, if you would not know, if I didn't tell you this and I would show you a picture of Lil Miquela just going around stuff, you would not necessarily, like, caught off guard, know if this was a real person and not a real person. I was going through the comments that she received, and again, she has 3 million followers, more than many other human influencers. And one of the comments was, and again, I paraphrase, something to the extent that, I know you are not real. I do know it. But everything about you makes me think you are real, and I really relate to you.
But this is, I interrupt your flow, and I'm sorry for that. But I think about what are the uses for this, and in terms of politics, and I'm sure you have.
I have something for you as an answer prepared.
But I think what hearing you talk has realized for me is that you think about the metaverse as like you going and exploring the metaverse. Like, so then you walk into the jungle and it's like, oh, what am I doing here in this cool metaverse? But no, there could actually be a situation where, and it's probably more in terms of
realistic, usable.
Facebook's alignment, which is like, we sit here in this apartment and I put on my headset and I am in the metaverse and I invite Joe Biden in, for example, for a conversation. And Joe Biden sits down and I ask Joe Biden a couple questions. And Joe Biden has a pre-programmed, very...
This is not the beauty of AI, that it only partly is pre-programmed. Part of it is responsive.
Right, crowdsourced to an extent. Yeah, but wouldn't that be cool? But I think, hold on.
Wouldn't you like to have Joe Biden invited to this podcast right now?
Yeah, well, Joe Biden's not going to come on this podcast.
Joe Biden should come on this podcast.
Yeah, he totally should. But no, I think what for me it highlights is something more of a flipping of thinking about you exploring the metaverse versus what the metaverse will offer to you and what you don't want to miss out on, which is like, okay, there's all this shit like Nike, new sneakers, and all this stuff. But also, in terms of politics, which will probably come later down the line, is like interact with your politician in the metaverse. There needs to be a very, very good, probably live feed relay.
But this is what it
to
is.
Get that politician to, like, imagine going to a town hall. People go to a town hall to hear what the politician says from questions from the people. But if you can bring the politician to your room without
them,
going
like
to
Harry
the town
Potter.
hall, but also hear them sitting on the chair respond, that is, I guess all I'm trying to say is that what I hadn't thought about and what you're provoking me to think about by virtue of your gift is that there is a situation where the metaverse is not just you exploring, it's actors implanting into it that you don't want to miss out on.
Yeah. And this is kind of, I mean, your comment obviously feeds into what I want to propose, which as a future trend, which next episodes may or may not confirm, which is this virtual politician. There's, with this technologies that I enumerated earlier, there is a real possibility to transform a real life person into a virtual person in a, let's call it, multiverse universe. And this person would have a lot of advantages compared to the real body. For example, being in several places at the same time.
By location, simullocation.
I mean,
Jesus, crazy.
You could have giving this kind of like more accessible politics. Imagine that, again, we could invoke Joe Biden or Donald Trump or a European politician of choice as we are sitting here together, and it was like, hey, bring in Joe Biden. Joe Biden, what do you think about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which we just mentioned in an earlier section of this podcast? And because this artificial intelligence would be trained, for example, on documents pertaining to Joe Biden's policy, Joe Biden's speech, we would get a very clear level of interaction. Wouldn't that be cool?
I gotta say, because it would be cool, but I think there's again, what I got from your discussion of this gift is that, I mean, I think what people think when they think of artificial intelligence is like the
Terminator. This is what they think. No, this surveys who point this out.
The politician beaming into your home and being trained on some models to be a replicant in the Blade Runner sense, which is like
you have Joe Biden right here.
Hey, like a chatbot. Hey, I'm Joe Biden in your home. Ask me a question. Hey, Joe Biden, what are you gonna do for my taxes? Boom, keyword taxes. Match to your demographic level. Here's what I'm gonna do for your taxes. With what you're saying about what the sophistication of these programs is going, would be more like, I think, I don't know if this will happen, but I would say this would be the best case scenario, was to beam the politician into your home and make it a crowdsourced event, so where the politician is either live or on some kind of delay, where the politician
is actually on the other end of the receiver.
It's a town hall. It's in your home, and it's not going to be fully automated, but it's going to be participatory in the sense that it's not just like, you're not going to be getting, like, if you say something, the politician is going to give you a pre-responded answer back, but you as a participant, when the politician is in your home, is not going to give you a pre-generated message, but you're going to be part of a conversation where the politician is going to be.
This is the beauty of AI.
The town hall in your home, responding to someone, but you're going to be visible and they're going to be right there.
Them giving you a pre-recorded answer is not artificial intelligence. Yeah, this is a computational speech processing thing, but it's not really artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is when there is no pre-programmed answer. The answer will emerge based on calculations of probabilities. And this is the uncanny valley. This is the uncanny valley which you want or don't want to go. This is very futuristic, of course. And this is also very risky for politicians to put all their eggs into, right? Because their virtual self may generate some wrong answer based on previous statements. However, I do personally think, and let it be on the record, that this is going to happen, maybe not in 2022 necessarily, but in 2024, it may very well happen. And the idea that I propose here is not necessarily new. We have two examples that I want to bring to the fore just to give some more embodiment to what I'm talking about. And it's a rudimentary version of what I'm talking about. It's about holograms. And everybody who has seen
He's
Star
not
Wars,
even here. He's a hologram.
it's a hologram.
If you haven't seen Escape from LA, it's the best use of a hologram, with Snake Plissken. Anyways.
That's one tip for you guys. But what I'm bringing on is politics, and it's pretty like raw politics. The first use of a hologram in political circumstances, as far as I could trace it back, contradict me if I'm wrong, it dates back to 2014, when none other than at the time the candidate for the prime minister post in India, the current
Modi.
Exactly, Narendra himself.
I mean, it's a massive democracy. You got to have holograms.
Please, exactly my point. So the Indian Prime Minister candidate turned himself into a hologram and reached his million-large constituency. And technology allowed Modi to make so-called appearances at hundreds of campaign rallies, sometimes at the same time in different places, in a way that feels more personal than a typical Zoom call, right? So 2014, I've seen some videos of this. I'll put some links if you want to show it to the listeners. It's not sophisticated, but it's sophisticated enough. Yeah.
In India as well, especially to certain.
It is a big tech hub. Let's not forget it.
No, it is, but it's also a democracy.
Multi-billion, billion-wide democracy, the world's largest democracy. To be. Moreover, we have this transported into the case of the United States, which is another very large democracy, covering a lot of population, but more than anything, a lot of space, just like a wide territory. And in 2019, Andrew Yang, who was a Democratic Party candidate to the presidency, revealed a 3D hologram at an Iowa testing ground. And I quote from an interview with Andrew himself. He says that the technology would allow him to see questioners and interact with people in real time. They would see my every gesture and movement.
Yeah.
So, obviously, Andrew Yang did not win the Democratic Party nomination. So, obviously, again, holograms did not swing the vote in any significant way. That is a more rudimentary presence. What I'm trying to propose here in this crystal ball, futuristic, talk to me in 3 years' time type of thing is that the AI-empowered virtual politician would be a presence that would kick on always. It would be always on, and it would be a virtual version of that politician that would be trained on that politician. So we're invoking Joe Biden in his living room today as we sit here and record a podcast. What would happen? Exactly, his basement, the COVID basement.
Which is the perfect testing ground for this type of stuff, right?
There's, if you think about training an artificial intelligence bot on Biden, there's probably thousands of hours of Joe Biden from the early days of his politician career to today in ways of speaking.
That's what I'm saying. He's not dealing with multiple contexts of crowds and locations. He's in the basement recording.
I think this thing would be a very, very good conversational partner. And of course, there would be a constant feedback. If there would be a miss, you and I was like, I don't understand what he's saying, right? Or I don't understand.
But that miss, that's the thing, is that one miss is the uncanny valley.
The miss is the uncanny valley, and sometimes missing something is what makes people comfortable bringing in this, because being too much close to reality may damage you, because people are like freaking out to be
the key word is
a bit odd. You see, like
authenticity.
Like, this is a projection of Joe Biden. This is not actually Joe Biden. He's not with us today in Sweden, but we can invoke him.
Is authenticity accomplished by programmers, or is it accomplished by the candidate?
It's accomplished through a trained algorithm and a technological system that I already explained, which brings an almost authenticity with this reservation. There'll be glitches. Anyway, I'm actually very curious if anybody makes it to this section of the podcast, which I hope you will. Let me know what you think of this. This is one of the things that I'm very curious in thinking more about at a scientific level, and whether, for example, people listening to the podcast would like to have this interaction. Would you like to ask Donald Trump some real questions? On one-on-one basis. Would you like to ask Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton, or if we move to Europe anyway, Olaf Scholz from Germany, or the new Prime Minister in Sweden?
I mean, there's so many directions. I mean, exactly what you just said in terms of, I think probably the most valuable, well, I don't know if it's the most valuable, but I could imagine foreign leaders beaming into
rallies,
non-residents' home. No, so I'm thinking like this is a great public diplomacy tool. This is I'm Joe Biden. Download, or if you have this hardware, download me into your home and ask me a question, and I have pre-recorded responses about.
No. These are artificially generated interactive responses. You see, this is a level up from what you're thinking.
I'm thinking. This
is Alexa 4.5.
Again, just off the cuff, I think this will backfire in domestic campaigning, but be useful for gaining foreign support for a policy position and international negotiations. It's just my first gut instinct.
Second, this is not tested, right? This is speculative,
of course, we're obviously speculating. But second, I think that let me phrase it this way. I really think that it needs to be a simulcast. It can't. I don't know the level of the sophistication of, like, you just think of all these examples like Microsoft's Tay. Just being turned to racist, and I know it's different than that, but I think that it really should be more of a hologramic simulcast. The politician is conducting that town hall,
and you can tune in from Sweden and see it.
And you can tune in, but also domestically within the U.S. and ask a question, and whatever the politician says is facing you. That's very powerful. But I don't see like a pre-trained model at the presidential level.
Again, this is a question. Almost all of these things are very
down ballot. Maybe.
Let's see what happens. I don't want to go too much further down the line. I just want to say one more thing, and then we're ready to your third gift, Michael. I will say this thing: there is no randomness. That hologramic casting has happened in the two largest democracies, right? One being the Indian one with Narendra Modi, and the other one being the United States.
No,
it's about the large geographical spaces, very large constituencies, 300 million population in the US, 1 billion in India. Obviously, there needs to be some technological complement in this day and age that would enable people, voters really, which are obviously fewer than the population of the country, but like still a significant number, to engage with the candidate in a way that gives them some form of significance in terms of interaction.
Definitely. I think technology moves that way. Politics will probably follow brands in figuring that out. But I think about this idea of prototype politics that Kreese talks about, which is the first or second or third candidate to use these features. I totally agree that on the one hand, they interact with the structures. Like, it makes sense that India is pioneering this because they need to reach a large geographical
population. Yeah.
In the US, there's also a large
diverse
democracy, but there's also very pinpointed areas where you need to have this
because of the electoral system. Yeah.
So I think you're right, and eventually this will happen. The question is to watch when it happens and then
Watch some fails.
and then who fails at it, and then who redevelops it in a way that actually is feasible. So I think there'll be a couple electoral cycles of course, as you said, you need the computational power, the training. The first person who deploys this may get a lot of backlash. They may get, incredible success. But I think the odds are it's probably not going to work.
Fringe candidates. It's not going to be Joe Biden,
it's going to be
right?
fringe candidates. And the question is, how does the established candidate see that fringe failure, work it over, and then take the prototype to make it into
It's
success?
not that difficult to do it. And this is where the technical development speaks in the favor of this development. And basically, this is where I'm going to stop because we can talk too much about it. But it's not that complicated to achieve this. And it may pay off for certain purposes and not for every purpose. Okay? But this is my prediction. Let's see if it turns out to be somewhat true in the coming years.
Interesting. Big prediction.
Big prediction.
Big prediction.
I'm going all in with this metaverse,
Wow.
You launch me with this Facebook and founders and visions and what have you. And now I'm like, hey, I'm taking you on that.
Yeah. All right. Here we are.
So metaverse is going to be a digital agora in which, well equipped with Oculus headsets, citizens will interface with politicians, all in their virtual
I would urge
avatars.
patience. I think I think the one thing I failed to mention in my last GIF is that gift. The metaverse was the name change was announced a few days before the kind of coordinated Facebook Papers launch was announced. So,
What are the Facebook Papers?
the Facebook Papers is so they had these trickling journalistic reports of Hogan. I think her name was
Francis.
Frances Hogan. She was going to launch these kind of internal documents of Facebook and.
The whistleblower.
Yeah, but there was also like a more of a coordinated cross journalistic publishing of these papers, which was made very public. Like on this day, we're going to start launching the Facebook Papers, and Facebook announced that they would change their name, basically like more or less the Sunday before that happened. And so I think it's
Well timed.
yeah. So there's aspects of that, and I think Facebook did a pretty good job by shifting the focus to the metaverse. The Facebook Papers had kind of a diluted effect, but anyways,
Augmented reality.
man, let's go to gift 3. We've been drinking some mulled wine here, and I'm kind of feeling it. So let's get into it. Platform.
What is your third?
My third gift is platform infrastructures and Web 3. So there's a lot of angles to hit here.
Yes, you're hitting very interesting angles already.
For those who made it this far in the podcast, now we're going to get a little bit geeky. So platform infrastructures is basically about the pipes of the internet, and
The pipes.
we talked with this year with Jean-Christophe Plantin, who's been doing who's been doing a lot of work on the absolute disaggregation of infrastructures in terms of radio access networks and like the pipes of how the internet works. I mean, this is actually so crucial to understand.
Like you mean the wires, the actual cables, the data transfers, the data centers.
The data transfers. But if you look at like 5G, for example, or radio,
Yeah.
how is radio performed? Well, there's certain protocols, but these days, instead of buying a radio access provider or something like that, and again, this is getting into things that I'm not really an expert in, but you can disaggregate all these components and build them yourself. So it's more of like package and play. So for his research, he's looking at how Google decided we're not going to run on like the major servers. We're going to build our own servers by virtue of the
Typical
fact
Google.
that we're gonna buy all the parts that you need to build the computer and the server and all these things. And this is inefficient. There's going to be some that fail, but it's much cheaper to do this. So we patch them together. And when certain servers go down, we're going to have tons more of them because it's basically a DIY project of internet infrastructure.
That's funny.
So the pipes of the internet. You don't think about them. It's like the pipes in your house. You don't worry about how your toilet flushes or how your drain works.
As long as they work.
Yeah, until they don't. And I can tell you recently, I had
A pipe problem.
a pipe problem in the drain. I had to get a plunger out and had to. You don't think about that working until you have to plunge it out and it works and everything goes together. And the same thing goes for the internet. So as we head towards this major, hyper American focused event of January 6th and the events at the Capitol that happened in January 6th, we're coming on the 1-year anniversary, which many think is like the ultimate signal of Democratic backsliding.
Knock
in
on
the
wood.
US. And I think we saw this pipe infrastructure in practice. We saw a clogged pipe. We saw something going on, or maybe we didn't, but I hope with this
This
gift.
is the thing. I don't necessarily follow you, to be very fair. And
I had a few glasses of wine.
no, it's not about this. It's about the argument of, I'll ask you this. What is the connection between events such as this uprising or insurgency and the pipes? Where do we see the pipes?
I will tell you, and I hope that, as I said, through the course of our conversation, in vivo, as we have it, I begin to think more about your gifts and my gifts are really bringing a bigger point that the internet architects are talking about, which is decentralizing the internet away from platforms, away from walled gardens, onto the blockchain.
This is a very interesting thing,
Yes.
especially for someone like you who wrote about digital architecture.
I wrote a bit about it, but now I see why it's relevant. And so
I think it's increasingly relevant,
It
especially
is.
in a
Like,
world where
it's-
this artificial intelligence comes in and all these other
it's
technological things.
It's all moving that way. I saw it on a Twitter space recently. Like, this shit is happening now. If you made it to this far in the podcast, this is your reward, so to say, which is just, us talking about this, which is actually what is happening now.
Speculation, but also future glancing.
Yeah, speculation, but momentum, big topic. But let's signal
Infrastructures.
Let's signal why it's important with the case of the January 6th riots, insurrections. Here's what happened. Parler, the social media platform, was seen as a key organization hub, similar as you were talking about with Belarus before.
Yes, exactly.
For how these
And
messages
alternative
were
ways to,
coordinated.
but also Facebook, just as in Belarus.
All this stuff, right? There was
Parler. Do we know anything about Parler? Do we know who made it? And
Parler was kind of this up and coming platform for conservatives. And we've seen it on the podcasts
I
previously.
remember Gap, right?
Gap, Minds, all these alternative platforms. Parler was just an alternative platform. Now, here's where the pipes come into play. So you had these events at the Capitol, and Parler was, there was like Trump talking about election, the voting systems didn't work, whatever. There was a very...
The voting system didn't work.
There was a focus from the pipes, which by the pipes, I mean Amazon Web Service. I'm talking about Apple App Store and Google Play Store, that they needed to basically shift accountability for what's on their platform to say,
This is not on our platform.
if legislators come to them, they need to say, well, it's this app. So Parler came in the crossfires. Apple Store and the Google Play Store I don't have all the exact specifics in front of me, but the point is that all of these angles, from the servers that run the site to the stores that allow people to download the app, basically said, hey, this event just happened.
We're not going to support this.
And we need to know, what are you going to do to like stop this mess?
This relates to what I was saying before about democracy and social media and digital media, right? Like in established democracies such as the United States, most of the effects that people have noticed and studied are negative to democracy, like insurrections against elected governments and so on and so forth. And this is a perfect illustration of what you're saying. Like this is on trend.
Exactly. And I'm kind of trying to mince my words, but actually,
just say it.
I don't care. So basically what happened was there was an insurrection. There was the events at the Capitol, insurrection, riot, whatever. I mean, the words you choose matter.
Uprising.
Whatever. A couple days later, basically all these pipes of the infrastructure messaged Parliament.
Stop.
And they were like, what? No, they didn't say stop. They said, what is your plan to mitigate this? Because we have heat coming from us because there was just people flooding the Capitol. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? And if you cannot provide us a plan in the next 24 hours, we're going to shut down the operations that make your program necessary to run. So in terms of Apple, for example, they said, we need to see what is your content moderation plan to protect the public interest, because now you're violating our terms and policies. Everyone's like, you're violating our terms and policies. And as what I gather from Parler's side was that they said, this is a hit piece on us as a conservative platform, right? So they kind of took a bad line, and basically the pipes were unplugged from the servers. So the servers mean the sites can't run. From Apple and Google, that means you can't download the app, so no new users. But there's a lot of other interesting angles, and I pulled this off Wikipedia. There was a cloud communications company called Twilio, which basically means the two-factor authentication system.
Yeah.
They
pulled it out.
They pulled that. There's a company called Okta, which denied them access to identity management, which results in the losing of some of their software tools. And there was a company called SkillaDB, which terminated their kind of database access. So basically, it's like the platform is neutered. Like no one can.
If infrastructure doesn't work, your social media service doesn't work.
It's not running on the servers, meaning it's not accessible as an app. No one can download the app via. So it's basically like it's been cut off, which is an understandable response.
Again, think about I just want to reply because it's an interesting comparison and maybe something telling. In Belarus, the authoritarian government shut down the internet. Simply, it turned off that switch in terms of the infrastructure towers of sending the internet signal, yeah? So they were able to kick that button off, push that button off, and it basically terminated communications based on data transfer, right?
Right.
So there is a power either in the hands of the marketplace, as you are emphasizing, or in the hands of authoritarian governments, as has been the case in Belarus, which is a case I know, where these things that we take for granted in terms of the connective action spirit are very easily actually the same in Myanmar, which was something that we also talked about, mentioned earlier. In Myanmar, the government also intervened by cutting off internet access to everybody, except probably for themselves, yeah? So it's very possible for political authorities to intervene and basically manage, if you want, or probably there'll be another word if you will be on the part of the protesters. Of course, if you look at the Belarus and the United States, these are very different cases.
That's exactly what I was thinking, which is you cannot shut down the internet in the United States.
In Belarus, this is also a small country with a small constituencies, and primarily it is an undemocratic country. In the United States, I think everything the reverse is true. It's a large country, and it's a democracy, and there's procedures in place for doing things. It's interesting that so much relies on private actors, such as Amazon servers or these companies you may named earlier, to provide services, but this is not something that's mandated by law, right? So the idea is that it's going back to this report that I was mentioning earlier, social media use in democracy in authoritarian versus democracy cases. The social media infrastructure, the architectures, to quote you, enable people to do exactly the same thing in Belarus as in the United States. In Belarus, the protesters have the cause of promoting democracy, and that's what they've been basically have to force to pay for and been punished for in 2021 for the large part of it. Whereas in the United States, the protesters are anti-democracy protesters for the most part. I believe that it's not controversial to say these people did not have a realistic perception of what election results look like, and they acted, even though in their own belief for democracy, in reality against democracy and a true valid election, for various sources of misinformation, which we're not going to go into. And this is exactly the dilemma. We have Belarus and we have the United States, which is a very unlikely comparison, looking at exactly the same coin, reverse or versa, right? United States could not shut down the internet because there's so many people that are not concerned with the insurgencies who would be affected. The Belarusian could afford to do so. But the infrastructure of politics is nevertheless there, and controlling the infrastructure gives you access to power over this connective action.
Well, you set me up so nicely for the gift.
I'm hoping
the big gift that
big
Santa
one.
left
At the very last
on the tree, which is, you're exactly right, which is, no, in the United States, you cannot shut down the internet. But there are components of the internet architecture that can shut down, primarily because as much as they want to be free speech, need to answer to regulators. And so these various aspects of Amazon Web Service and all these minor companies like Twilio, Okta, all the web servers, they don't want to have a part of the shenanigans that were January 6th. And I will just hearken back to one of the podcast episodes I did, which was, there was a growing knowledge that the Donald subreddit would be shut down. And so there was an alternative website called Donald.win. And I emailed one of the guys who was kind of responsible for that. And I went back to the Donald.win to see, was that actually where the users had flocked to as the alternative site? And when I went there, there was a message displayed on the platform, shut down. I mean, it wasn't a platform, it was an internet site. And he said, I own America.win and the Donald.win URL, but I do not and have never owned the website source code, user data, post data, comment data, or any data that went along with the Donald.win prior to February 2021. Complete distancing, right? That guy's probably in so much legal trouble right now. But in terms of what you're saying, you're entirely right in that the United States cannot pull Belarusian tactics. But various companies that operate the internet infrastructure in the US, when an event like this happens, which you wouldn't
almost
think
unexpected to happen, exactly.
In a pure American democracy, there's two things that come into play. One is the ideology of the people who run that platform, and that is a huge issue both for the operators, but also people who feel like they're censored, whatever. The bigger thing is, and I will get to my find a meta gift, which is saying, the decentralization of the web architecture, it's out of control. I think, and this is why Jack Dorsey left Twitter. And I think what he's going to be focusing on doing, which is the original version of the World Wide Web, the Web 1.0. It was all about democratization. It was all about free speech. What happened is private companies colonized those various aspects of the web. Meta is a great example. Facebook just sucked user data into a walled platform. Twitter, to a lesser extent, but still pulling interactions into a walled platform. When it comes to the January 6th issues, that responsibility for the Parler people becomes spread out. Who's the web
It's corporate
hosting?
social
What
responsibility, though.
Who? Yeah.
I think part of this is I mean, my interpretation, and I don't know if you agree or not, is the reason why these companies, including, after all, the Amazon Web Services, connects to two things. One is corporate social responsibility, which is something that's been going on since the 90s. These companies, especially American companies, not Belarusian companies, obviously, feel that they have a role to play in the social space. And the other one is simply marketing. They do not want to be associated with such a, let's call it in a mild form, negative events, right? They don't want to be the one who implicitly would support a coup d'etat in the United States. So they don't want to assume that negative publicity, and so they want to distance themselves, even preemptively, before there was any responsibility assigned or anything of that nature. And this is beyond the ideology of any owner or founder compared to what we were talking about before. I think this is simply survival instinct for any company. But at the same time, it's very relevant to talk about the difference between markets, right? Like the way markets work and the way governments work. This is possible to happen in the United States because this is a more liberal, market-oriented country in which various services could thrive. I don't think this will be the case in Europe, which is the case I am familiar more than with the United States to some extent, because here the regulation of what is acceptable and is not acceptable to host and publicize and spread are more clearly defined in a legal way. And so there is no question about it. If you want to have an insurgency against a democratically elected government in Europe, you will not be allowed to be hosted by any server, and any server company, service company who would provide you with that server would be accomplice to the act. Yeah.
Right.
And whereas in the United States, there's more of a liberal approach,
Right.
And where company responsibility comes more into play.
I would take a different spin on it, which is you're totally right that there's more regulation in Europe. But what this January 6th event showed is that any social media platform is contingent upon multiple private services for their operation, like the two-factor authentication, the servers, the app store, both Apple and Android, to get their apps out. And so these platforms in a private capacity moved out. They basically gave Parler a 24-hour decision to clean up your act or, fix it, or we're out. No government regulation. And I think what this shows generally, and I think what founders, going back to I think one of the reasons Jack Dorsey left Twitter is to focus more on the basic internet architecture, which is, it was originally meant to be a kind of, democratic online space. Yes. And what happened was it got pulled into platforms like Meta, like Twitter. Like, user attention is divided, and there's all these ideological components that interact with that, which is, for example, the employees at Apple pushed the company to send this message to Parler, right?
Listen to
So
Google.
there's all this. And so what there is an active discussion on right now is to pull away from this walled garden approach and actually reinvent the internet by virtue of blockchains.
This is a radical proposition.
No, it's radical and it's happening now. And then this is what I think the difference between the Zuckerberg founder metaverse approach to coordinate in the metaverse versus Dorsey, who clearly has a passion for blockchain, is going on. And so the question is more not putting web. I mean, we've seen the platformization of the internet, which is just user activity within platforms that private data is then sold and done in various ways. What has not been emphasized so much is the private aspect of the infrastructure of those platforms to keep them running. And I think what the January 6th events showed is that there are so many platform aspects that there's no accountability. Because if you think about it, if there is a public blockchain move to Web 3.0, which I don't know exactly what that means in terms of...
It's not existing yet.
The infrastructure of the web. But, I mean, in terms of regulators, if it comes to platforms, you got a few fat targets, right? You got Meta, you got Twitter, you got Snap. And
TikTok.
They can't fucking regulate. They can't deal with those. And there's also a human element of the founders that's maybe confounding things. But at the same time, they can't regulate that. If you decentralize the internet and you put it on a blockchain, and all of a sudden the idea of platforms becomes absolutely kind of fluid and archived in a blockchain, if they can't regulate the few big platforms, which is the problem of Web 2.0, according to these guys, how are you going to regulate a decentralized structure? And that's probably the appeal for these founders.
And this is the other side of the coin is how do you make money out of that? You see, I think it has to be like a systemic change, for example, by accepting a Bitcoin currency to pay for various things in order for the system to be supported. And that has to be accepted not only by companies, but also by banks and higher level institutions. This is definitely the future. I think we're getting a glimpse of the future right now. And both my AI speculation and your Web 3.0 speculation are something that haven't yet taken true grip on the reality, but on the basis of everything we discussed, there's something to watch out for. And hopefully our listeners now would also have some insights into this.
The listeners who have made it this far, it's hardcore, first of all. But no, I think point is these problems around January 6th and the Parler platform highlight a broader issue of platformization of the web. And I think there is a growing from key web founders like Tim O'Reilly and like people who actually like can re-architect the web are thinking, fuck this is terrible. And I would add that there's the battle of infrastructures in terms of walled garden 2.0 versus a decentralized blockchain 3.0, and also licenses. And I only bring this up in context of the January 6th issues because there is a new Trump social media platform called Truth.
Exactly. I've heard of this. I wanted to ask you about it.
And so this platform launched via a special purpose acquisition company, a SPAC. I'm not going to go into all that, but they borrowed open source code from Mastodon, which is a federated microblogging system, which
what is that supposed to mean?
I'm not going to go too far into it, but basically they are borrowing from a decentralized server model, probably in some prescience to avoid this type of connection to other external services. Like so the Trump future platform is anticipating a Web 3.0 move is what I would basically boil it down to, which is Mastodon is a like decentralized server network where you can borrow the code and you can take it and you can adapt it to your own purpose. The Trump network has merged with the SPAC to take Mastodon code and morph it into their own social network, but they did not reference the Mastodon network in their code. And then Mastodon
said, "What's up with
sued
that?"
them, and basically they had to so basically the Trump social network borrowed open source practices that are already moving towards 3.0. They didn't cite it. There was a sort of legal
copyright
threat,
issue,
and basically they said, "Fuck it, we're not gonna battle this in court," because I think the Trump social network, if there's anything going for it, it's going to copy this model, and it may be actually a prototype driver of this model for conservatives.
I'm not entirely sure that, I mean, of course, I completely agree with you in terms of the purposes and the expectations and the desires at hand here. But from what I have been reading, and of course, this is very fresh, apropos 2021, this is really fresh news. From what I have been reading, there is no real appetite from the part, even of conservative voters and Trump partisans, to join these particular sites. And you can blame it on the pandemic, or you can blame it on technological burnout, whatever you want to call it. But there's just no appetite, apparently, to join new platforms.
No, you're totally right that there is no appetite. The interesting part is exactly about the infrastructures, that this will be running on a federal microblogging infrastructural system that does not rely, for example, on Amazon, which could be seen as a form of tech censorship.
A private company.
Yeah. So they're gonna use open source code to run their new platform. And it's not a question of whether they can attract users or not. I'm sure if it's Trump behind it, they'll do it. What this is actually an early pilot of is, will users join this platform and stay there based on how the platform runs, not necessarily the profile of the platform. So it's an early test.
That's something like you were saying earlier, right? In terms of infrastructure, any platform can run on this structure. It could be Twitter, which is not known for having particular conservative leanings, right? So it's interesting how the technology underlying a lot of the communication sphere will turn out.
Yeah, there was something else I wanted to say about it, but I can't.
Even more. When will my third gift be
I can't
given?
remember. No, the third gift is coming up. I just wanted to say that this will be the most, as far as I know, the most viable Mastodon clone, which was hidden. We had Marcos Bastos years ago. He told me. He said Mastodon is the model of the future. And we see this going.
He may turn out to be right.
The point I make in this gift before we get to the last gift is that the Trump social media app that you see, there have been multiple clones of it.
What is it called again? Truth?
Truth. Again, merged by SPAC, but it is actually borrowed off. It is a
open source.
It is a leaning into the open source decentralization culture that I think everything is moving toward 3.0, because the 2.0 model has not worked. And I would just add that for regulators, if you can't do the 2.0 version where data is aggregated among certain companies, how the fuck are you going to... And this is exactly where Dorsey is going.
Anyway, can I go?
Yes. Last gift. Jesus
We made
Christ.
it. We made it so far. I mean, this is going to be a heavily edited version, I'm pretty sure.
I'm not editing anything.
Nobody's going to go through this, at least not in a meaningful way.
Did your computer die?
My computer died, yes.
Yeah, that's why you're using mine. Okay. So this is how long the episode has been.
No,
but congratulations, listeners, for sticking around.
No, I want to go to my second one, which is now
More
my third
knowledge
one.
for
Can you
you.
go up?
What is the gift?
Well, after this excitement about Web 2.0, 3.0,
talk about it.
we're going back. My final gift is not futuristic whatsoever. It is actually a return in time to something that was familiar and worked very well. Yeah. And that is the word of newsletters.
Newsletters.
Yes, it is precisely
the oldest form of human contact.
Well, not quite the oldest, but among the oldest digital ones.
Sorry, I'm moving your mic around. You're good.
What is interesting about newsletters is that COVID, our dear friend, has brought about a change. And this is why at the beginning of our conversation, which seems like a million years ago, but probably it's only 2 hours ago, I was asking about the performance of the pod. Many digital overview sources, including the Oxford Internet Institute production of media reports, point out that podcasts have been going down in popularity. Primarily, but not yours. Not yours, is it? According to their data, which obviously is
biased,
very, very broad.
Pods.
It's very, very broad. That's one. So, like, it doesn't pertain to particular niche audiences. But according to the Institute data, podcasting has recorded one of the lowest level of growths in the year of the pandemic 2021. One of the explanations they venture is that it's because of the loss of commuting time, typically a time when individual listeners would tune in to their favorite podcast.
I agree, but I must say, I think, podcasting,
I don't want to, this is not a personal take against
no, of
you.
course.
This is a general, very general trend.
Of course not, but I must say,
You feel hit.
No, actually not, because I realize that this podcast is not indicative of most podcasts, and if any listeners are still listening, props to you. But I do think there's a bit of a difference, or a bit of an industry move, which is like there has been, you'll hear that like a quarter of the population has listened to podcasts because they're so numerous. Or you have,
very popular
look
podcast.
at it, like in the US, like 1/3 of American populace has listened to a podcast in the last month. Yes, but the explosion of independent podcasting by virtue of hosts like Anchor, which makes it really easy to just record a podcast from your phone, means that there are so many podcasts that are produced.
Yes, but podcasts are a side subject to what I want to talk about. Believe it or not.
All I want to say is that there has been like there's like millions and millions of podcasts that are introduced into repositories, but very few remain. And that's all.
And I'm very glad that the Social Media and Politics podcast thrives very nicely in this new age of COVID. However, it may very well be the exception.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm trying to say.
I'm just trying to give an explanation, not a whatever. Go ahead.
Anyway, so podcasting in general, with the exception of this
all
one,
these millions of podcasts that are being introduced.
All the millions of podcasts, while being introduced, they actually may lack in oomph But what gains in oomph during the COVID period, spanning 2020 and 2021, the year we're reviewing, is newsletters. And this is the interesting part. And I think it makes a
newsletters.
It makes a funny and interesting contrast to everything you have just been outlining in terms of Web 3.0
and
Bitcoin
and
blockchain and everything. The newsletters. Listeners will be like, whoa, newsletters. However, I am also pretty sure that at least a good amount, if not all of the listeners of the podcast, would be actual subscribers to some newsletter or another. And just to give an example, the New York Times, a very established news source, very mainstream, very old newspaper that has made a successful move to the digital world, has at this point of recording 55 newsletters covering anything from politics to cooking. And these 55 newsletters are sent to the emails of none less than 14 million subscribers. This is a very large number for a newspaper. You have to take that into account. So I want to quote one of the newsletter editors from the New York Times, and they say, I think readers appreciate having someone else to do a lot of the work in sorting out what's important and highlighting what in the Times they should spend their limited time on. So I think this is really telling of a lot of the work that is being done by the newsletters. And basically, this reflects also in the growth of specialized newsletter provider websites. And probably the listeners would be very familiar with one provider in the English-speaking world.
Axios.
That's one, but that's more of a news provider. They are having news reporters, investigators, thinkers on the ground. What I'm thinking about is just some platforms for newsletters. And the number one is...
Tell me.
Substack.
Independent newsletters.
You can start a newsletter as a pendant to your podcast if you so wish. And if you are, for example, a journalist or an established social media figure, you are more likely to do so using Substack. It is listed on the stock market, and it is a very, very popular place for newsletters to be hosted on. Because you just talked about it, I can also mention something called Facebook Bulletin, which is a similar service, but obviously connected to Facebook, as the word would signify.
Web 2.0.
However, there is many national contexts, and in every national context, we have a different major player. So Substack is mostly for the English-speaking world, and then we have various ones around the world. What is important to mention for the benefit of the podcast listeners is that this newsletter trend is worldwide valid. So it's not about English speakers or French speakers or Japanese speakers or Indonesian speakers. This is about everyone tuning in during the pandemic on newsletters. And this has, in my opinion, two explanations, possibly. One is the need to, in the work from home situation, eliminate the podcast that probably would have provided this type of content, audio.
On the commute,
or in this kind of, let's call it, for lack of a better word, alone time. Listening to podcasts is not a very sociable situation because you're isolated with your headphones on, right? Or listening out loud in a room. You don't want to interact with others when you do that. Newsletters are much more interactive. You can easily quote of them or talk about them, like this is what I'm reading, and much more flexible. So that's more suitable for a work from home time.
Personal consumption.
Yeah. So that's one reason, obviously. The other one is this explosion of information, which is generated around the world because of the COVID situation. A lot of newsletters tried or started out as explainers. What is this COVID situation about? What do we know scientifically about the virus? What do we know about the social consequences of this, that, or the other? And then they basically set off a trend. These explainers, yeah. So the way I would try to systematize this is to think of newsletters as fulfilling two important functions when it comes to readers or subscribers. And the first one is curation, and the second one is analysis. Going with the curation part, we have specialized editors that make a selection of what would be called the most important news, either from a source, the New York Times, or around a topic. And it can be cooking, or it can be politics, or it can be, migration, something along these lines. And then when it comes to analysis, we have experienced journalists that write analytical pieces on their own, which is creating a sort of tension with the newsrooms to which they belong. But journalists who write analytical pieces making sense of the news. What does it mean that there is a coup d'etat in Myanmar? What does it mean that we have a coup d'etat attempt in the United States? There are qualified voices known from print media, radio media, other media.
With their sources.
And they give their interpretation. This is what it means. I quote you this, that, or the other. I have access to this or that information. And I interpret with you, reader, the events of the day. So that's the benefits from the receiving end. There is also if you want, an infrastructure motivation from the newsletter owners. And this is the reason why I go back to the New York Times example. There's 55 newsletters. This is why they pay this organization, the New York Times, this business, pays editors to create so many newsletters. Because it is on the record across variety of subjects and media forms that newsletters have a huge rate of conversion, reading newsletters, people into subscribers to the news source. So if your entry point in the New York Times is their morning brief newsletter, which is free and accessible for everybody, you are very likely up to, if I read it correctly, 75% to become a subscriber to the New York Times. And that's valid for financial news, is valid for tourism news, is valid for all sorts of news. So there's a reader incentive and a producer incentive to produce such newsletters. And
very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's something, for me, the most striking, if you want, part in this whole system is that this is a very old form. This is about getting an email, to be very frank, right? This is getting an email.
Or a direct mail.
Or a direct mail.
A subscription. Essentially.
To a form of content, right, that is very old-fashioned ultimately. It's not about customized to you personally. The same newsletter goes to everyone who is subscribed to the newsletter. It's not something that's tailored to your location or your age or other characteristics. So it's kind of like going back to Web 1.0 rather than Web 3.0, right? And there's a lot of interest and going by the stats, quite a lot of satisfaction with these letters. And in my opinion, this has to do with the burden of sorting through too much information. I think we are now, at least in the Western world, but not only, in a situation where there is too much information about something, COVID crisis being one, but politics in general being, an area of exploration in which we are overwhelmed as a regular reader. And so having a guide, a trustworthy guide through the events of the day, through the events of the week, can help you with making sense of the world around us, making chaos into some orderly form. And this is what newsletters do, I think. Some newspapers, I quoted already the New York Times, but also many other newspapers around the world. Probably one of the most successful is a Japanese one called the Asahi Shimbun. And they have been a leader in digital transition because they have integrated their content and their newsletters to Line, which is the Japanese messenger app similar to WhatsApp.
Spin-off discussions.
Again, I know you have lots of comments, so let me just get it through, and then you'll be basically scoring off all these points. So basically, what I wanted to take out for the social media and politics podcast is that newsletters, first of all, are old, but they make a comeback. Many of you guys who listen to this probably subscribe to those newsletters. So I'm very curious if you take the time to reply, how many newsletters do you get weekly in your inbox or monthly? So this is a common phenomenon. Also, this may be a very nice hybridization between old communication forms such as email-delivered media and social media. And the example goes back to this Japanese newspaper, the Asahi Shimbun. Basically, they use this app to provide short versions of their articles in WhatsApp, if you want, line-friendly format. And that gets them millions and millions of readers. Also, this is a door opening the other way. Social media influencers or social media people of importance, let's say, also use this opportunity to provide more in-depth content than they typically would do in Instagram posts or Twitter posts. And so we have a trend of journalists, but also communicators that bring their own newsletters to an audience that is specialized in that field. And of course, in this context, I need to give a shout out to Tom Moylan, who is giving out the newsletter called Speaking My Language, which is a clear example of a newsletter studied by someone that has a lot of social media presence already, but that uses this opportunity to dive much more deeply into problems and to reach a more niche audience.
And focus attention.
Focus attention, and for what I've understood from all the statistics, it seems that this transition social media with an add-on newsletter is a recipe for success. So what I want to, sum it up is that, yes, we do have the Web 3.0 that Michael has been discussing at length before, but there's also place for technology that was developed for Web 1.0 way back when in the 90s, and that first of all, technology is not exclusive. There's some people who like the 3.0, but there will be lots of people who like 1.0, and that there is a hybridization, if you wish, between social media and newsletter, email distribution type of media in a way that enriches both sides of this communication equation. And with this, I stop.
Yeah, I hearing you talk, I jump into this idea that there has been, from what I've discussed on the podcast, there's been a huge underemphasis both on digital marketing, well, maybe not in the digital marketing space, but in the academic space at least, on email programs and one-to-one messaging. And I think that there is...
Do you subscribe to any newsletters yourself?
The Axios newsletter, which I've encouraged many, if you're a long-term listener of the podcast, you heard
I am one of them. am. I'm one of them.
those messages. And hey, look what happened to that newsletter. Wildly successful.
2.4 million users.
Yeah. And so, I did it for both to promote that, which I thought was a kind of cool model, and also there was a kickback in terms of a t-shirt. They sent me a medium t-shirt, doesn't fit me. But anyways, no, so there is
So you
that.
subscribe to some newsletters yourself?
Yeah, I subscribe to a lot of the Axios newsletters, and I haven't gone. But I mean, here's the problem for the average consumer is like
there's too many newsletters.
Do you? I mean, like I'm not a New York Times subscriber,
I am a New
so
York Times subscriber. But you see, this is the thing
So
about
if I-
conversion. I'm
so
coming
I can
into
get
the
their
young
free
way.
letters and their non-free letters, and also from the Wall Street Journal, and also from the name any news outlet. Like you can get a level of a T.
Do you subscribe to
free tier.
any individual newsletters except for Tom's?
I subscribe to no media paid.
No, but the free, like, for example, maybe this is off, but I subscribe to,
In Sweden, for example, many people subscribe to the local newspaper Sydsvenskan. I don't pay for media.
no, this
Because
is for free.
I'm conditioned to not.
This is for free. So there's different journalists
Yeah.
that have their own newsletters, newsletters that are associated but not produced, let's say, by the New York Times or by the
So you
Guardian.
subscribe to individual journalists.
Yeah, I do. I don't want to like go into
What's the monthly cost?
nothing. Doesn't mean they're free.
Uh-huh.
This is just like a free information that I enjoy reading, like deep analysis once a month about some trends in news that interest me. For example, European politics. Also, Politico has such a newsletter and so on.
Yeah, but then they also divert you towards their paid premium service. And I guess that's kind of also my issue is that these newsletters are generally gateways into larger coverage, but I don't know. I feel like I think you're right. I think the newsletter model is good, but
I don't know if it's good or bad in terms of absolute normative terms, but this is used for sure. And it's an old method, but it works. And I think I was thinking that this could be interesting for you as you're particularly dedicating your efforts into investigating campaigns, right? Like
it's huge for campaigns. I mean, direct mail.
Exactly. And this is like people go thinking a lot about 3.0 and everything you have mentioned earlier in the podcast. But old media forms, old communication and networking forms are still present and thriving. And this is part of the of thinking about adding, or let's say, the impact of technology on communication. The obvious example, beyond newsletters, even though this is what I focus right now on, is radio. People thought radio, this is so old-fashioned. Nobody ever is going to listen to this. And here we are recording a podcast, which is just another form of radio. Yeah. So, and we're also casting on Twitter Spaces, which is another form of radio, talk show radio. It's very easy for, let's say, progressive minds to think, oh yeah, I'm inventing a new way of doing things. Whereas doing things in the old-fashioned way doesn't necessarily imply discounting that communication form. There is an audience, and not of boomers, to go back to your generational distinctions, but of young people as well who prefer to connect in this way. And my final thought on this, and of course then you're absolutely free to comment, is that there's been a huge push in the Web 2.0 for interactivity. There's been a huge push for making people customize, interact, comment on, express themselves through particular social media channels, because that was considered to be an enabling technology way to say of being in the public space. And what I find interesting about the newsletter is that in two particular ways it deviates from this model. One, which I already mentioned, is about lack of personalization. Me and an 80-year-old Mongolian could receive exactly the same mail from the New York Times, subscribing both of us to the New York Times, yeah? So that is, in a sense, unpersonalized as can be. The second is that I am not interested to interact whatsoever with the editors or writers or copywriters of this newsletter. I have no desire to leave any comments or any feedback to this newsletter. I'm just interested in getting the information of the newsletter and close that email and move on with my day. And I take myself to some extent as the representative user. I'm not interested in interactive web. I'm not interested in a dynamic web. I'm interested in a 1.0 web in which I get information and I get to think about it or talk about it with you in this context, right? But I don't feel the need that I need to interact with any publisher of that information or debate it with them. Even though both with Axios and with New York Times, I do find some elements of flow or impartial thought or things where I could maybe have something to say. So this is what I think is interesting to point out while we have been on a AI and Web 3.0 very futuristic chasing of the future. I want to bring us down to earth in a sense with this newsletter trend, and that's my final word.
Yeah, I mean, I think I draw a parallel between the modern day newsletter and the supermarket advertisements that we all get in our mailbox, whether we say that we want the advertisements or not. And for example, for me, I get them digitally, but I also get the spillover in my mailbox, which is whatever the supermarket has on sale this week. Do I necessarily want that information? No. Do I want it in a print newspaper? No, I don't. But I'm very happy to be aware of it somehow. So I subscribe to it online or not. And at least in Sweden, you see all these mailboxes with like no advertisements.
Yeah, exactly.
Please don't put the pamphlet of this week's supermarket. But this is what we actually want. We want to see that, and we want to, not the newspaper version, but it's much better to have it on our phones.
So there's something about this ease, you see? I think it has something to do with the ease.
Yeah, if you take that into a political perspective, even though we say we don't want the platforms, it's also very nice to get, I mean, think about Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all these various messages that we may see in terms of raising $1 on Instagram or having I'm thinking about more US perspective, but like having 30-second spot on Facebook designed just for Facebook versus what you see on the TV versus the radio. Just give us the direct mail version of what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Save
us some time.
Save us some time. Let us peruse through it. I think and I have gotten those, even in Sweden, I've gotten those very anti-immigrant messages, even though I am an immigrant in Sweden. I've gotten them in my mailbox, and I'm just like,
this is interesting.
Let me see what you guys are sending to a mass populace. So there is something about this feeling of mass to, if you get the pamphlet from the Sweden Democrats, which is like kind of like the...
It's not really a newsletter, right? It's not
a newsletter, but it's still a pamphlet.
Yes.
And a newsletter is a customized pamphlet.
Yeah.
Right? And so what you're talking about is journalists who are reporting.
They're commenting rather than reporting. I think it's an interesting division of labor, if you want, between people who get a salary regardless of what they're going to find. Like they go out in Iraq or Chile or wherever to report, and maybe they don't find anything right now. You have to
But
wait.
don't you think they iterate on the comments and the insights that they get?
I think there's, in my view, and maybe this is partial, and so I welcome any comments on this, but in my view, there are two types of newsletters. The one type, which is made by professional journalists who establish their brand separately from the one of their newspapers. So it can be in Italy, it can be France, it can be in the United States, it can be in Philippines. Think about the newest Nobel Prize winner, who is a journalist from the Philippines. I'm not sure that she developed a newsletter necessarily. Her name is Maria Ressa, but she publishes a lot of investigative journalism that may shed some more light on kind of shady government actions in the Philippines. This is the type of work you would do it in one of these subgenres of newsletters, like getting new information, investigative journalism, new type of information. The other one is more, as I would call, explainers. This is where Tom comes into play. For example, what does it mean to write something about, if you are a speech writing person, your job is to write speech writing. How can I help you to write better speeches? If you're in the business of communication, how can you write better communication strategies, and so on and so forth. So it's very practical, very hands-on. If you're following social media, Matt Navarra has a very good newsletters. What is the latest infrastructure change in Instagram, in TikTok, in Twitter, in Telegram, what have you? How do you, as a social media manager, respond to these questions? So this is information that is relevant to your profession and is very customized. And some are more in-depth, some are more superficial, some are more frequent, some are less frequent, but they give you this extra utility for your profession or your interest. Apparently, some of the biggest newsletters out there on Substack have to do with hobbies, I would say. Like one of them is called The Athletic, which is obviously about moving your body. Roughly speaking, in multiple ways, like running, weightlifting, sword fighting, what have you, and so on and so forth. Cooking, it's another one that's very, very, very popular at the moment.
Yeah. Personalized interest mailing is a...
But you see, like, this is fitting, sorry to interrupt you, but just it fits you in this idea of like, customized news consumption. It's not news finds me, but I select the news I'm interested in. I'm interested in cooking. True example. I subscribe to the cooking newsletter. Yeah, because I know this is something I am going to use in my everyday.
And there's some element of that can be built into politics in terms of email programs and direct mailing around
this
politics.
Works.
And it's been proven, it's been tested, it's been enduring. And I think that
enduring
is what I would
wonderful
say
word for this.
Is something that has been under the radar, which is direct mail.
Mails are being opened. Like if I get a newsletter, I will open it. Maybe not immediately, but in the 24 hours of its lifetime, I will open it. And this is the tendency for newsletter subscribers.
Yeah. So I think what you're getting at is that first of all, direct mail has been, via email form, has been an enduring, understudied aspect of political campaigns. But by virtue of the multiplication recently that we've seen of niche newsletters, how will that interact with how
Local news is another aspect. Like you live in Malmö, you don't care about what happens in Sweden as a whole. No.
But if someone
But somebody tells you,
targeted
like,
me with the campaign, said, "Hey, this is why
this is
this
about
matters."
Malmö. Yeah, this matters to you. You want a bus to take you to the metro. You want a bus to take you to the shopping center. This is a direct relevance to you now. You will want to read that. So this is basically also another way for local news, very localized information, to get traction. And this also has been captured in the Oxford Internet Institute, for example, report on news media. That local news through a newsletter service have been seen, especially in COVID years, in 2021, the subject of our podcast now, a revival.
Let's see how newsletters evolve. There is
Do you have a newsletter, for example?
Axios, markets.
And so this is basically like you're having a specialized interest, and then you deliver the information that's customized to your interests. It may not be customized to you personally, but it's customized to your interest arena.
But there's a gap for someone. I mean, as an immigrant in Sweden, to reach out to me with a newsletter and say, here, first of all, here we care. B, here's what we'll do. C, how you can get involved. But as far as I know, there's no such.
Again, this is a question of enough mass, right?
Yeah, it could be, or enough cost-benefit analysis between how does an immigrant outreach translate into votes into local politics, which I think is actually disproportionately in favor of the politicians.
I think this is an interesting subject to further explore. I do not think in this context that Swedish politicians are aware of their voters who have other background than the local national background.
No, well, maybe this podcast will incite
tip the balance.
Massive change in the Swedish local environment.
Hopefully.
But
who knows?
I hope that, goddamn, if you made it this long, congratulations to you, listener. And thank you for tuning in so much. I had a great time.
We've talked a lot about a lot of things, but all of these are really at the core of what defined the social media and politics, for the most part, aspects of 2021.
Exactly. So thank you so much for tuning in. And I think I will just end with the fact that there are many episodes coming up. That, I have
disclose some topics.
I got to craft the interviews for them, but we have some really cool, interesting episodes coming up in terms of German politics. We got some stuff with Jakob Oma on mobile technologies for research. We got some stuff on internal Facebook data, understanding Facebook news patterns within Europe specifically, and more
coming
stuff. Yeah, really cool on the academic side, but this has been more of an open conversation. If you've made it this far, I hope you enjoyed it. And for Dr. Anamaria Dutceac Segesten, reader in Strategic Communication at Lund University, have a great new year, and let's see, will there be a Web 3.0 or not?
Exactly.
Who knows? But until then, I'm your host, Michael Pacetta, for Dr. Anamaria Dutceac Segesten. See you in the new year.